Hello, everyone, and welcome back to X-Ranger. Before we begin, I thought it would be interesting if each of you could leave a comment indicating which part of the world you're joining us from. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe if you're enjoying the episodes. Now let's get comfortable, relax, and start our program. All right, so I've been sitting on this for years, and I don't really talk about it much because, honestly, who'd believe me? But something made me want to share it here, where people might get it. This happened back in August 2015, and I still get chills thinking about it. I was camping with a buddy of mine, just the two of us, up in northern British Columbia near Fort St. James. We'd picked this spot beside a secluded lake that's way off the beaten path. Not the kind of place you stumble on by accident. You have to hike in a good couple hours from the nearest dirt road, and even then, it feels like you're the only people left on Earth. We got there early in the day, maybe around 10 in the morning, after a rough drive and a sweaty hike with our packs digging into our shoulders. The air was crisp and clean, the kind that fills your lungs and makes you feel alive. But there was this underlying stillness that I didn't notice at first. The lake was glassy, surrounded by dense pine forests that seemed to go on forever, and the only sounds were the occasional bird call and the gentle lapping of water against the shore. We set up camp on the north side, where the ground was flat enough for our tent, and we had a clear view of the water. It was perfect, or so we thought. We spent the afternoon fishing, using simple rods and some bait we'd brought. The trout were biting like crazy, and we caught a good dozen, enough for dinner and maybe breakfast the next day. My friend, I'll just call him my buddy, since names don't matter much here. He's the outdoorsy type, always calm and collected, but even he commented on how quiet it was. Not just quiet, but like the woods were holding their breath. We laughed it off at the time, figuring it was just the isolation getting to us. As the sun started to dip, we built a fire using dry wood we'd gathered, and the smell of smoke mixed with the pine scent was comforting. We cooked up some of the trout right there on the flames, eating with our hands and feeling pretty satisfied with ourselves. The sky turned this deep orange and purple, and by the time full dark settled in, the moon was out. A bright, almost full moon that cast silvery light across the lake. It was around 10 o'clock at night, and we were just sitting by the fire, not talking much, just soaking in the peace. That's when I first saw it. Movement across the lake, maybe 100 yards away. At first, I thought it was a bear. We'd seen scat earlier, so it made sense. But something felt off. I nudged my buddy and pointed, and we both squinted into the darkness. The moonlight was strong enough to outline shapes, and that's when we saw this massive, hunched figure near the shoreline. It was dark, almost black against the water, and it was using its hands to eat something. We realized it was pulling fish from a pile, like it had caught them itself, and shoving them into its mouth with these low, grunting sounds that carried faintly over the water. My heart started pounding right away, not from excitement, but from this deep, primal fear. This thing wasn't like any bear I'd ever seen. Bears move with a certain lumbering grace, but this was different. It had broad shoulders and long arms that swung as it crouched, and its hair was thick and matted, glistening wet in the moonlight. It was focused on eating, tearing into the fish with what looked like sharp, deliberate motions. We sat there frozen, not making a sound, just watching. I could feel the cold seeping into my bones even though the fire was warm, and my buddy's breathing had gone shallow beside me. Then the terror hit like a physical blow. The thing suddenly froze mid-bite, its head snapping up and turning sharply toward our camp. It was like it knew we were there all along, and that moment of recognition sent a jolt through me. I felt my stomach drop, and my hand started trembling. It stood up fully, and that's when I realized how huge it was. Over 8 feet tall, with a thick torso and legs that looked powerful. Its hair dripped water, and in the moonlight, I could see the outline of a face that wasn't human, but wasn't animal either. It had a heavy brow, and its eyes seemed to lock onto us from across the lake. It stared for what felt like an eternity, probably only a few seconds in reality, but time stretched out. I could hear my own heartbeat thudding in my ears, and the crackle of the fire seemed deafeningly loud. Then it let out this deep, guttural exhale, a sound that wasn't a roar or a growl, but something more primitive, like air being forced out of a massive chest. That sound carried across the water and hit me right in the gut, making the hairs on my arms stand up. It took slow, deliberate steps backward, never breaking eye contact, until it melted into the shadows of the trees. Just like that, it was gone. The silence that followed was heavier than before. My buddy and I didn't speak for a long time. We just sat there, staring at the spot where it had been. The unease settled over us like a blanket, this intense feeling that we'd been seen, acknowledged in a way that wasn't threatening, but wasn't friendly either. It was like we'd intruded on something private, and it had let us know it was aware of us. We eventually stirred, dousing the fire and retreating to the tent. But neither of us slept much that night. Every little noise, the rustle of leaves, the splash of water, made us jump. At one point, I heard faint splashes from across the lake, like something was moving in the water, but we didn't dare look out. We just lay there in the dark, listening, our fear keeping us awake until the first hints of light appeared. As soon as it was light enough to see, we crawled out of the tent, stiff and exhausted. The air was cold and damp, and the lake was shrouded in mist. We decided to investigate the opposite shore, mostly out of this morbid curiosity mixed with fear. We paddled across in our inflatable kayak, the water icy against our hands, and when we got there, the scene was surreal. The mud along the shoreline was churned up like something heavy had been pacing or digging, and there were these large, human-like footprints everywhere. I mean, they were massive, 17 to 18 inches long, with 5 toes and an arch that looked almost human, but too big and deep. We used a tape measure from our gear to check, and the stride between them was about 5 feet, which meant whatever made them was moving with huge steps. Among the footprints, we found torn fish remains scattered around, scales and bones mixed with mud, and there was this coarse, dark hair caught on a low-hanging branch. It was thick and wiry, not like any animal hair I'd touched before. But the weirdest part was the smell. A musky, earthy odor that hung in the air, like wet dog and old leaves, but stronger. It made the back of my throat itch, and I could still taste it hours later. We took a few photos with my phone, but they came out blurry in the low light. And honestly, I didn't want to stick around long enough to get better ones. We packed up our camp in a hurry after that, not even bothering with breakfast. The whole time I felt this eerie sensation, like we were being watched from the trees, but I never saw anything. It wasn't a scary feeling anymore, more like we were being escorted out, like whatever that thing was had made its point and was letting us go. We hiked back to the car in silence, the weight of what we'd seen hanging between us. Even now, years later, I can close my eyes and see it standing there, staring right at us, and that guttural exhale echoes in my memory. I don't know what it was. Bigfoot, Sasquatch, whatever you want to call it, but I'm convinced it was real, and that encounter changed something in me forever. I've never gone back to that lake, and I doubt I ever will. Story 2. I've been sitting here for 20 minutes just staring at the screen, trying to figure out how to even start this. My hands are still a little shaky, even now, years later. I don't talk about it much because, honestly, who would believe me? But I see people sharing their stuff here, and it feels like maybe you'll get it. So here goes. This was back in September of 2019. Me and 2 of my buddies, we decided to do a proper backcountry camping trip. No glamping, no RVS, no campgrounds with bathrooms. We wanted to get way the hell out there. We picked this spot in the northern part of Kootenai National Forest in Montana. It's rugged, dense, and honestly, Once you're a few miles in, you feel like you're the only people left on the planet. The hike in was a beast, nearly 6 miles off this sketchy, overgrown forest road, carrying all our gear on our backs. We were sweaty and tired, but also buzzing with that good kind of exhaustion. We found this perfect clearing right next to a tributary that fed into the Yak River. It was a beautiful spot, flat ground, soft moss, the sound of the creek just constant and calming. We set up our tents as the sun started to dip, the air getting that real crisp autumn bite to it. I remember checking my phone for the temperature. It was in the mid-40s. You could see your breath, little puffs of steam in the fading light. We got a fire going pretty quick. One of my buddies is a real pro with a ferro rod, had a nice blaze crackling in no time. We were just sitting there on logs we'd dragged over, passing a flask of whiskey, talking about nothing important. Work, sports, the usual. The sky was completely clear, and without a moon, the stars were just insane, like someone had thrown a bucket of glitter across black velvet. It was so quiet, just the fire and the creek. Peaceful, you know? The kind of quiet that actually has a sound to it. That's why we noticed the other sound so clearly. It started as something just off. The creek had its own rhythm, a constant gurgle and splash over the rocks. This was different, a slow, rhythmic splashing, like someone was wading through the water, taking their time with each step, not frantic, not an animal scrambling across. It was deliberate. Tush, tush, tush. We all stopped talking at the same time, just looked at each other. My one friend held up a hand like, shh, as if we needed the reminder. The sound was getting louder. It was coming from downstream, around a bend in the creek that was swallowed up by the darkness beyond our firelight. My heart started thumping in my ears, a dull, heavy beat that matched the pace of that splashing. We were all staring into the blackness, trying to see anything. The fire was bright, but it ruined our night vision for anything beyond its circle. All we could see was the water right in front of us, and then just a wall of dark. Then we saw the ripples. Even in the dim, flickering light, we could see the water's surface disturbed. Little V-shaped waves were moving toward us, originating from around that bend. Something was coming, something big from the size of those ripples. It wasn't a deer. A deer would have been higher pitched. Quicker splashes. This was heavy. My throat went dry. I remember licking my lips and tasting the cold air and a little bit of whiskey. I could feel the heat from the fire on my face, but my back was ice cold. We were all frozen on our logs, just watching. And then it came around the bend. It emerged from the darkness all at once, and my brain just short-circuited. It was massive, upright, walking on 2 legs through the creek. The water came up to its shins, and this thing had to be 7-8 feet tall at least. It was maybe 20 feet away from us. It was covered in hair, dark and wet and matted, glistening in the firelight. Its shoulders were impossibly broad, and its arms, they were so long. They swung as it walked just slightly, and they hung down past its knees. It was a person's shape, but everything about it was wrong. The proportions were off, like a nightmare version of a man. It moved with this powerful, fluid grace that was terrifying. It wasn't clumsy. It was sure of itself. It paused right in the middle of the stream. One of its huge feet braced on a submerged rock, and it turned its head and looked right at us. That was the worst part. The looking, its eyes. They caught the firelight and they glinted, not like an animal's eye shine, which is usually green or yellow. This was a dull, deep red, like 2 dying coals in its face. I couldn't see any whites, just dark sockets with those red points of light fixed on us. I felt seen, not just glanced at, but seen, understood. It was an intelligence in that stare, and it was not friendly, and because the air was so cold, and this thing was so much warmer, steam was rising off its body in little wisps. It just stood there, steam curling off its wet, dark fur, those red eyes locked onto the 3 of us, huddled by the fire. I stopped breathing. I think we all did. The only sound was the crackle of the fire and that slow, steady splashing of water around its legs. I could feel my friend next to me trembling. I was gripping the handle of the small hatchet we'd used to split kindling so hard my knuckles were white. My other buddy had the can of bear spray in his lap, his hand clamped around it. It felt so stupidly small in that moment. Then it moved again. It didn't make a sound, not a growl or anything. It just lifted its other foot and continued wading across the stream. The water surged around its legs. It reached the opposite bank in a few more strides and stepped out onto the moss and gravel. It didn't run. It didn't look back. It walked up to a young pine tree, maybe 3 inches thick. It didn't even swing its arm back. It just lifted its open hand and smacked the trunk. The sound was like a gunshot, a loud, sharp crack that echoed through the little valley. The tree just snapped in half, the top part crashing down into the brush. My whole body flinched at the noise. The sheer casual power of it was staggering. That wasn't a warning shot, that was a demonstration. It turned then, moving parallel to our camp, keeping us in its line of sight, and that's when we heard the sounds from it. Deep, chesty rumbles. It wasn't a roar, it was lower than that. A vibration you felt more than heard, like the idle of a giant engine. It came from deep in its chest and it made my own ribs hum. It took a few steps, and then it stomped one of its feet down on a dead, dry log that was lying on the ground. The log didn't just break, it exploded, shattered into a dozen pieces with a sound like a car crash. I felt the impact through the soles of my boots, a literal vibration in the ground. It was stomping the ground so hard we could feel it. This went on for what felt like an hour, but was probably less than a minute. This massive creature just pacing back and forth maybe 30 yards away, making these insane displays of power, rumbling at us, all while keeping those red eyes on us. It was intimidation, pure and simple. It was letting us know exactly what it could do to us, and that we were in its space. We were absolutely paralyzed. My heart was hammering against my ribs so hard, I thought it would crack one. I was sweating despite the cold. A cold, clammy sweat that made my shirt stick to my back. I remember the smell, the smoke from the fire, the damp earth, and this weird, musky, wet dog smell that was so strong it had to be coming from it. Then it just stopped. It stopped its pacing, turned its head to look up the steep forested slope behind it, and then it turned its whole body and strode into the trees. It didn't lumber, it moved fast with purpose, and it vanished into the darkness in seconds. It was just gone. The silence it left behind was almost louder than the noise it had made. We didn't move, we didn't speak, we just sat there, listening. For a few minutes, there was nothing. Then, from up on the hillside, we heard a snap, a single loud branch breaking, then another farther away, then just the occasional rustle, the sound of something very large moving through the undergrowth. It stayed up there. We could hear it, circling us or just watching for hours. We didn't sleep. We didn't even go into our tents. We just sat by the fire, feeding it every stick we could find, holding that hatchet and the bear spray, staring out into the blackness, listening to every little sound the forest made. Every creak of a tree, every scurry of a mouse was that thing coming back. The night lasted forever. When the sky finally started to turn from black to deep blue, and then to a pale grey, we finally felt like we could breathe a little. The sounds from the hillside had stopped a while ago. As soon as there was enough light to see, we went to look. We had to. We had to know we weren't crazy. The first thing we saw were the footprints. On the opposite bank, in the soft moss and gravel, were these huge, human-like footprints. I took my boot off and put it next to one. My size 10 boot was a kid's toy next to it. We measured it later with a tape from our first aid kit. 17 inches. From heel to toe, 17 inches. The toes were broad, and you could see the impression of a low arch. We followed the trail. There was a path of broken vegetation, ferns and shrubs just trampled flat, and leading away from the creek into the woods was a trail of wet footprints. They were already starting to dry at the edges, but the centers were still dark and damp. They led right up the slope, where we'd heard it moving all night. We didn't follow them far, maybe 20 yards into the trees. We just looked at each other, and without a word, we all knew. We packed up our gear in a frantic, silent rush. We didn't even bother to properly put the fire out, just dumped our water bottles on it and scattered the logs. We hiked those 6 miles back to the truck in record time, not stopping once, looking over our shoulders the whole way. We didn't talk about it in the truck, we just drove. It was hours before anyone even said a word. That was years ago. I still go camping, but I stick to more populated areas now. I never go that deep into the woods anymore, and I'm always listening, always. What gets me, what really sticks in my head and haunts me when I'm trying to fall asleep, isn't just the size of it or the sound of it breaking that tree. It was the intelligence in its eyes. It wasn't just some animal. It looked at us, it assessed us, and it decided to put on a show to scare us away. It was deliberate, it was aggressive, and it knew exactly what it was doing. I still don't know what it was. I just know what I saw, what I heard, and what I felt, vibrating in the ground under my feet. And I know that whatever it was, it wanted us to know it was there. Story 3. Okay, so I've never really told this to anyone before, not in full detail, because honestly, most people would think I'm crazy or making it up. But it's been eating at me for years, and I figure if I'm going to share it anywhere, it might as well be here where folks might actually get it. This happened back in the fall of 2008 in Texas. I was out hunting by myself, something I'd done plenty of times before without any issues. I've always been comfortable in the woods, you know. Grew up around them, knew how to handle myself, but that day changed everything for me. It was a crisp morning in late October, the kind where the air has that bite to it, but the sun feels warm on your skin once it climbs higher. I'd packed my gear the night before, my trusty rifle, some water, a few snacks, and my hunting knife, nothing fancy. I drove out to this spot. I'd scouted a couple weeks earlier, deep in the piney woods east of Dallas. It was public land, but not heavily trafficked, which is why I liked it. I parked my truck off a dirt road, grabbed my stuff, and headed in just as the sun was starting to light up the sky. The plan was to spend the whole day out there, maybe bag a deer if I got lucky. For the first couple of hours, everything felt normal. The woods were quiet except for the usual sounds, squirrels chattering, birds calling, the rustle of leaves under my boots. I was moving slow, keeping my eyes peeled for any sign of game. The ground was covered in a thick carpet of fallen leaves, mostly brown and yellow, and the smell of damp earth and pine filled the air. I remember feeling pretty good, relaxed even. But then, around mid-morning, I started to get this weird feeling, like I wasn't alone. At first, I brushed it off. Hunters get spooked sometimes. It's natural. Your mind plays tricks on you in the silence. But this felt different. It wasn't just a fleeting thought. It was a persistent, gnawing sensation that someone or something was watching me. I'd stop to listen, and everything would go quiet, like the forest was holding its breath. Then, when I started moving again, I'd hear footsteps, not the light, skittering kind from animals, but something heavier, something that matched my pace. If I walked, it walked. If I stopped, it stopped. I tried to tell myself it was an echo or maybe a deer mirroring my movements, but deep down, I knew it wasn't. I kept going, trying to shake off the unease. I'd glance over my shoulder every now and then, but I never saw anything definite, just shadows shifting between the trees, or what looked like a dark shape ducking behind a trunk. It was always in my peripheral vision, never clear enough to make out. The figure was tall, though, really tall. I'd estimate it was over 7 feet, maybe even 8, and it moved with a kind of fluid grace that didn't seem human. But I didn't get a good look. It was always just a glimpse, like my eyes were tricking me. As the day wore on, the feeling intensified. My heart started beating faster, and I could feel sweat trickling down my back despite the cool air. I gripped my rifle tighter, my knuckles turning white, I remember thinking maybe I should turn back, but I didn't. Stubbornness, I guess, or maybe curiosity. I wanted to see what it was, or prove to myself that it was nothing. I was following a game trail that wound through a thicket of pines and oaks. The sun was high overhead now, casting dappled shadows on the ground. The footsteps kept pace with me, always just out of sight. Sometimes I'd hear a branch snap to my left or right, and I'd spin around, rifle raised, but there'd be nothing there. The air felt thick, heavy, like before a storm, even though the sky was clear. My mouth went dry and I had to keep swallowing to wet it. I started talking to myself under my breath, just stupid stuff like, "Get it together, man. It's probably just a bear." But I've encountered bears before, and this didn't feel like a bear. Bears don't stalk you like this. They usually avoid people. After what felt like hours, though it was probably only 1 or 2, I reached a part of the woods I hadn't been to before. The terrain started sloping downward, and the trees thinned out a bit. I could hear the faint sound of running water in the distance, probably a creek. That's when I noticed the drop-off. It wasn't marked or anything, just a sudden cliff edge that fell away into a ravine. I'd guess it was about 15 feet down, maybe more. The ground was loose there, covered in slick leaves and mud, and if I hadn't been paying attention, I could have easily stumbled over it. But I wasn't paying attention. My mind was racing, focused on whatever was following me. I was so caught up in glancing behind me that I didn't see the edge until I was almost on top of it. I remember taking a step forward, my boots sliding on a patch of wet leaves, and my balance started to go. In that split second I thought, "This is it, I'm gonna fall." My heart leaped into my throat, and I threw my arms out, trying to catch myself. And then it happened. A scream erupted from the trees to my right. It wasn't human, not even close. It was this raw, powerful sound that seemed to tear through the air, so loud it felt like it was vibrating in my bones. It wasn't high-pitched like a woman's scream. It was deeper, guttural, full of force. It stopped me dead in my tracks. I froze, my body rigid, and I swear I was inches from the edge. If that scream hadn't happened, I would have gone over. No doubt about it. For a moment, everything was silent again, except for the ringing in my ears. I was still teetering on the edge, my feet scrambling for purchase. I managed to back away slowly, my heart hammering against my ribs so hard I thought it might burst. I was breathing in ragged gasps, and my hands were shaking. I looked toward where the sound had come from, but I couldn't see anything, just dense trees and shadows. Then, before I could process it, another sound came, a roar, but not like a lion or anything I'd ever heard. This was deeper, more primal, and it shook the trees around me, literally shook them. I felt the ground vibrate under my feet, and the leaves on the branches trembled. The roar seemed to come from everywhere at once, echoing through the ravine. It was so intense that I dropped to one knee, my hands over my ears. It lasted only a few seconds, but it felt like an eternity. When it stopped, the silence that followed was deafening. No birds, no squirrels, nothing, just the thumping of my own heart. I stayed there, crouched, for what felt like minutes, trying to make sense of what had just happened. That's when it hit me, that roar, that scream. It wasn't random, it felt intentional, like a warning. It saved me from falling. The thought sent a chill down my spine that had nothing to do with the cold. I slowly got to my feet, my legs wobbly. I backed away from the drop-off, keeping my eyes glued to the trees where the sounds had originated. I didn't see anything, but I felt its presence. It was still there, watching me. I could feel it in the pit of my stomach. This wasn't some mindless animal. It was intelligent. It knew I was in danger, and it intervened. Why? I have no idea. Maybe it was protective, or maybe it just didn't want me there, but it saved my life. I didn't wait around to find out. I turned and started walking away, at first slowly, then faster. I didn't run. I was too scared to make sudden movements. but I moved as quickly as I could without breaking into a sprint. Every few steps I'd glance back, half expecting to see that dark figure following me, but I didn't see anything. The woods were eerily quiet, like they were holding their breath again. The walk back to my truck felt like it took forever. My mind was racing, replaying the events over and over. That scream, that roar, they were so loud, so powerful. I've heard coyotes, bobcats, even a mountain lion once, but nothing like that. It was something else entirely, and the way it shook the trees. I've been in earthquakes before, and this was similar but localized, like it was focused right where I was. When I finally reached my truck, I threw my gear in the back and climbed into the driver's seat, locking the doors behind me. I sat there for a long time, just breathing, trying to calm down. My hands were still trembling, and I had to grip the steering wheel to steady them. I looked out at the woods, and for the first time in my life, they didn't feel familiar or safe. They felt alien, like I'd stumbled into someone else's territory and been let off with a warning. I drove home in a daze, not even turning on the radio. I kept thinking about what happened. That creature, whatever it was, knew I was there, and it chose to save me. It could have easily let me fall, or worse, attacked me, but it didn't. It used that scream to stop me, and that roar to, I don't know, assert itself. Scare me off? It worked. I haven't been back to those woods since, and I doubt I ever will. To this day, I can't explain it. I've read stories online, heard accounts from other people, and it sounds similar to what some call Bigfoot or Sasquatch. But I don't know. All I know is that it was real. It was intelligent, and it changed how I see the forest forever. Now, when I'm out in nature, I'm more aware, more respectful. I don't take it for granted anymore. And sometimes when I'm lying awake at night, I can still hear that roar in my head, and I get chills all over again. I just thank whatever it was that it decided to spare me that day. Story 4. So, I'm just going to come out and say this because I need to get it off my chest, and honestly, I still get chills thinking about it. This happened about a year ago, but it feels like yesterday. I was driving north on Route 146 in Massachusetts with my sister in the passenger seat. It was one of those clear, sunny afternoons in late summer, the kind where the sky is so blue it almost hurts your eyes, and everything feels normal. Too normal, you know? We were heading up to visit our aunt in Worcester, just a casual trip, nothing out of the ordinary. I remember the car was a bit stuffy because the air conditioning was acting up, and I had the windows cracked open just enough to let in some breeze. The radio was playing some old rock station, and we were chatting about nothing important, like what we were gonna have for dinner later or how our mum was doing. The highway wasn't super busy that day. It was around 3 in the afternoon, so most of the rush hour hadn't started yet. We were cruising along at about 65 miles per hour, just keeping pace with the other cars. Route 146 is one of those roads that cuts through a mix of towns and woodsy areas. You've got stretches where it's all houses and stores, and then suddenly you're passing dense patches of forest that make you feel like you're in the middle of nowhere. We were in one of those wooded sections, about 20 minutes past the Rhode Island border, when I first saw it. Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed something tall and dark standing near the edge of the trees on the right side of the road. At first, I thought it was just a trick of the light or maybe a weird shadow, but as we got closer, my brain tried to make sense of it. I figured it was a person in one of those ghillie suits, you know, like hunters wear, because why else would someone be standing there all covered up? But we were on a highway. Who the hell stops to put on a ghillie suit and stand by the woods? It didn't add up, but I brushed it off, thinking maybe it was some kind of prank or a weirdo doing performance art or something. But then we closed in, and I got a clear look. My heart just dropped into my stomach. This thing was huge. I'd say roughly 7 feet tall, and it was covered in this thick black hair from head to toe. It was walking upright on 2 legs, moving parallel to the tree line, and its gait was so confident and steady like it owned the place. It wasn't running or stumbling. It was just striding along, almost casual, but with a purpose. I remember my hands tightening on the steering wheel, my knuckles going white. I could feel my pulse thumping in my neck, and I must have slowed down without even thinking because the car dipped to about 50 miles per hour. I glanced over at my sister, who was scrolling through her phone, and I said, "Hey, look at that!" My voice came out all shaky, and she looked up, annoyed at first, like I was interrupting her. But then she followed my gaze, and her face went pale. She didn't say anything at first, just stared, and I could see her grip the door handle like she was ready to jump out. We were maybe less than 50 feet away by then, close enough to see details, the way the hair on its arms seemed to ripple in the breeze, how its shoulders were broad and muscular, and how it moved with this unnatural grace. It didn't look human at all. The proportions were off. The arms were too long, and the head seemed kind of small for its body, but I couldn't see its face clearly because it was turned away from us. Then, as we watched, it turned sharply and disappeared into the trees. Just like that, 1 second it was there and the next it was gone, swallowed up by the forest. But we both saw something black moving deeper among the trees as we passed, a shadowy figure retreating quickly, like it knew we were watching. I remember the sound of the wind whistling through the window suddenly felt louder, and the sun seemed too bright, making everything feel surreal. My sister finally gasped and said, "What the hell was that?" Her voice was a whisper, like she was afraid it might hear us. I kept driving, but my foot was heavy on the gas, and I sped up without meaning to. My mind was racing, trying to process what we'd seen. I scanned the side of the road for any parked cars or people, anything that could explain it. But there was nothing. No vehicles, no signs of a prank, no other hikers or hunters, just empty highway and those thick woods stretching out on either side. That's when the real fear set in. If it was a person, why weren't they running or hiding? Why would they be out here in the middle of nowhere, dressed like that, and walking like they had all the time in the world? And the way it moved, it reminded me of a bear. But it wasn't a bear. Bears don't walk on two legs like that, not for that long, and they're not that tall or sleek. This thing was built like a giant hairy man, but way more primal. My sister started freaking out, asking if we should pull over or call someone, but I told her no, we needed to keep going. I was too scared to stop. What if it was still out there, watching us? The thought made my skin crawl. I could feel sweat beading on my forehead, and my shirt was sticking to my back. The car felt claustrophobic all of a sudden, like the walls were closing in. I kept checking the rearview mirror, half expecting to see it following us, but there was nothing. Just the empty road behind us. We drove in silence for a few minutes, the only sounds being the hum of the engine and our ragged breathing. I remember my sister fumbling with her phone, her hands trembling so much she could barely hold it. She said, "Do you think it was Bigfoot?" And I just shook my head, not because I didn't believe her, but because I didn't want to. I've always been a skeptic about that stuff. You know, the kind of person who laughs at those TV shows about cryptids. But in that moment, I couldn't deny what we'd seen. It was too real, too vivid. I tried to rationalize it again. Maybe it was a guy in a costume, but why? And how did he get out here? There were no houses nearby, no trails that I could see. The nearest exit was miles away. It didn't make sense. The creature's gait was too smooth, too natural for a person in a suit. People in costumes usually move awkwardly, but this thing moved like it was born to walk that way. And the hair, it wasn't fake looking. It seemed matted and wild, like it had been out in the elements for a long time. As we got closer to Worcester, the woods thinned out, and we started seeing more civilization. But the fear didn't go away. It was like a weight on my chest, making it hard to breathe. My sister kept glancing out the window, her eyes wide, and I could tell she was just as freaked out as I was. We didn't talk much for the rest of the drive. Every time I tried to say something, my throat felt dry and the words wouldn't come out. All I could think about was that thing. Its height, its dark fur, the way it vanished into the trees like it was part of them. When we finally reached our aunt's house, we stumbled out of the car, and I remember my legs feeling weak, like I'd just run a marathon. My aunt asked if we were okay, and we tried to play it cool, but we must have looked like ghosts. We ended up telling her what happened, and she laughed it off, saying it was probably just a bear or a trick of the light. But my sister and I exchanged a look. We both knew it wasn't. We'd seen it too clearly for it to be a mistake. Later that evening, after we'd had dinner and tried to act normal, I went outside to get some air. The sun was setting and the sky was turning orange and purple, but all I could think about was the woods back on Route 146. I kept imagining that thing still out there, roaming around, and it sent shivers down my spine. I pulled out my phone and started searching online for any reports of similar sightings in the area, but I didn't find much. Just a few old forum posts from people claiming to have seen something weird, but nothing concrete. It made me feel even more isolated, like we were the only ones who knew. That night I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I'd see it again. That tall, dark figure walking along the trees. I could almost smell the pine and damp earth and hear the rustle of leaves under its feet. My sister texted me around midnight, saying she couldn't sleep either. And we ended up talking for hours, going over every detail. She described how the creature's arms swung loosely as it walked, and how its head never turned toward us, like it was ignoring us on purpose. It was eerie, how calm it seemed, like we were nothing to it. The next day, we drove back home on the same route, and I was on edge the whole time. I kept my eyes glued to the woods, half hoping and half dreading to see it again. But there was nothing, just the same old trees and highway. It was like it had never been there at all, but I know what I saw. I've replayed it in my head 1,000 times since then, and it never gets less terrifying. People have told me I'm crazy, or that it was a hallucination, but my sister saw it too. And that's what keeps me up at night. We both know it was real, and whatever it wasn't human. I don't have any answers, and I probably never will. But that one day on Route 146 changed everything for me. I can't drive through wooded areas without my heart racing, and sometimes, when I'm alone, I still feel like I'm being watched. It's just there, in the back of my mind, this thing I can't explain, and I guess I never will. Story 5. Okay, so I've never really talked about this before, not in any real way, because honestly, who would believe me? But it's been eating at me for decades now, and I feel like I need to get it out there. This happened back in October of 1980, so a long time ago, but it feels like yesterday sometimes. My husband and I were driving on Hecker Pass Road, heading from Watsonville toward Mount Madonna. It was one of those lazy autumn afternoons where the light starts to get soft and golden and everything feels calm. We'd been visiting some friends in Watsonville and were on our way home, just enjoying the drive. The road is twisty and narrow in parts, lined with big old trees and patches of open fields, and it was one of those routes we took pretty often, so it felt familiar and safe. I remember the car we had back then, a beat-up old Ford Pinto, tan color, with seats that smelled like stale coffee and leather. My husband was driving, and I was in the passenger seat just watching the world go by. The radio was playing some soft rock station, but it was fading in and out because of the hills, so we mostly just talked or sat in comfortable silence. The air coming through the cracked window was cool and carried that earthy smell of fallen leaves and damp soil. It was maybe around 4 in the afternoon, because the sun was starting to dip lower, casting long shadows across the road. We were on a stretch where the road curves sharply to the left, with a steep drop-off on one side and a dense wall of trees on the other. I was gazing out the window, not really thinking about anything, just letting my mind wander. Then, out of nowhere, I saw it. On the shoulder of the road, maybe 50 feet ahead, there was this thing. At first, my brain couldn't make sense of it. I thought it might be a bear or a large animal, but it was walking upright, like a person, but not like any person I'd ever seen. It was tall, really tall, like over 7 feet, I'd guess, and it had these huge, broad shoulders that made it look powerful and heavy. Its body was covered in thick brown fur that looked matted and wild, not like any costume or suit. The fur was a deep, muddy brown, almost reddish in places where the sunlight hit it, and it moved in a way that seemed completely natural, like it was part of the animal. What got me the most was the stride. It took these long, effortless steps, covering ground quickly, and its arms swung slightly at its sides. But the weirdest part was that it didn't seem to have a neck. Its head sort of sat right on its shoulders, no separation, like it was all one solid piece. My breath caught in my throat, and I gasped so loud that my husband jumped. I clutched the dashboard with both hands, my fingers digging into the hard plastic. My heart was hammering against my ribs, and I felt this cold sweat break out all over my body. "What is it?" my husband asked, his voice tense because he could see the panic on my face. But by then, we were already past it. The road curved again, and the thing was behind us. I twisted in my seat, trying to look back, but the trees blocked my view. "Stop the car!" I yelled, but my husband shook his head. "I can't, not here," he said, his hands tight on the wheel. "This road's too winding, and there's no shoulder to pull over safely." I kept staring out the back window, my heart still racing, but there was nothing there, just the empty road and the trees. My husband asked me what I saw, and I tried to describe it, but the words came out all jumbled. "It was big," I said, my voice shaky, "like a man, but covered in hair, and it was walking like it owned the place." He gave me this look, half concerned, half skeptical, and said it was probably just a bear or a trick of the light. But I knew it wasn't. Bears don't walk like that. They're more hunched over, and this thing moved with a purpose, like it was going somewhere. The rest of the drive was tense. I couldn't stop shaking, and my hands were clammy. Every shadow in the trees made me jump, and I kept expecting to see it again around the next bend. My husband tried to calm me down, saying it was nothing, but I could tell he was uneasy too, because he kept glancing in the rearview mirror. The air in the car felt thick, and the radio static seemed louder now, almost like it was mocking us. I remember the way the steering wheel felt in his hands. His knuckles were white from gripping it too tight. When we finally got home, it was getting dark, and the normalcy of our house felt wrong, like the world had shifted, and I was the only one who noticed. I couldn't eat dinner. My stomach was in knots. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that thing, the way it moved, the sheer size of it, the absence of a neck. It wasn't aggressive or anything. It was just walking, but there was something about its presence that felt ancient and wild, like it didn't belong in our world. I tried to shrug it off, to tell myself it was a bear, or maybe someone in a weird outfit, but deep down, I knew. I'd heard stories about Sasquatch, but I never put much stock in them until that day. Later that night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, and I could still feel the adrenaline coursing through me. My husband was asleep beside me, snoring softly, but I was wide awake. Every creak of the house made me flinch, and I kept replaying the moment in my head, the gasp, the clutch of the dashboard. The image burned into my mind. I thought about going back the next day to look for tracks or something, but I was too scared. What if it was still there? What if it wasn't alone? That day on Hecker Pass Road changed something in me. I've driven that route a few times since, but I always get this knot in my stomach, and I can't help but scan the shoulders, half expecting to see it again, but I never have. Over the years, I've mentioned it to a couple of close friends, but they usually just nod and change the subject. So I've kept it to myself, mostly. But now, putting it into words, I realize how real it felt. The fear, the confusion, the sheer impossibility of it. And even after all this time, I can't explain it away. It was there, and I saw it, and that's something I'll carry with me forever. Story 6. The day itself was nothing special. It was one of those hot, sticky August days where the air feels like a wet blanket. I'd spent most of it puttering around, fixing a leaky faucet in the kitchen, nothing major. By evening I was beat. I've got this screened-in porch on the back of the house, my favorite spot in the whole world. I settled into my old wicker chair with a book, a cold beer on the little table beside me. My dog, Buddy, a big old yellow lab, was stretched out on the floorboards, already snoring. It was perfect. The crickets and katydids were going nuts. That constant buzzing chorus that just screams summer night. It was so loud it was almost inside my head, and then it just stopped. It wasn't a gradual thing. It was like someone flipped a switch. 1 second, the world was full of that noise, and the next it was just gone. The silence was heavier than the noise had been. It pressed in on my ears. I lowered my book, listening. Nothing, not a single peep. Buddy lifted his head, his ears pricked up. He let out this low whine deep in his throat, and then he scrambled to his feet and shoved his head under my chair. That wasn't like him. Buddy's scared of thunderstorms, not of the dark. That's when I heard the first thump. It came from the direction of my vegetable garden, which is about 60 feet from the porch. A solid, heavy sound, like a sack of potatoes being dropped. Then another, and another. It wasn't a random noise. It was a rhythm. Thump, crunch, thump. My first thought was a bear. We get black bears around here, but they're usually more interested in the trash cans than the garden. Still, I didn't want one tearing up my tomatoes and corn. I stood up, my joints complaining a little. "Stay," I told Buddy, but he wasn't going anywhere. He was trembling, pressed hard against the wall of the house, his whole body shivering. I grabbed the big metal flashlight I keep by the porch door. It's heavy, solid, felt good in my hand. I unlatched the screen door and stepped out onto the back steps. The air was still thick and hot, but now it felt different. Charged. I clicked on the flashlight. The beam cut through the dark, a bright white tunnel pointing toward the garden. I took a few steps across the lawn, the dew already wetting my sneakers. That's when the smell hit me. It's hard to describe, but I'll never forget it. It was musky, like a wet dog that's been rolling in something dead, mixed with this sharp, sour tang, like spoiled meat and old sweat. It was so strong it made my eyes water a little. I remember thinking, no bear smells like that. I kept walking, slower now, the beam of the flashlight dancing ahead of me. My garden is surrounded by a 4-foot-high wire fence to keep the deer out. As I got closer, I could see the tall stalks of corn moving, but there was no wind, none at all. The leaves weren't rustling. They were being shoved aside violently. I aimed the flashlight right into the middle of the corn rows, and I saw it. At first, my brain couldn't make sense of the shape. It was huge and dark, crouched down among the plants. It had its back to me, and it was just tearing up my corn plants, roots and all, with these effortless, brutal motions. Its shoulders were massive, rounded mounds of muscle, covered in what looked like dark, wet hair. It wasn't like a bear's fur. It was stringier, almost matted. With every pull, I heard the sharp snap of the stalks breaking. My heart started hammering against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat of pure fear. I should have run. Every instinct was screaming at me to run, but I was frozen, just staring. I must have made a sound, a gasp, or my foot scuffing the grass, because it stopped. It went perfectly still. Then slowly it started to straighten up. That was the worst part. Watching it rise, it just kept going up and up. It turned its upper body toward me as it stood, and when it was fully upright, its head was a good foot higher than the top of my 4-foot fence. I'm 6 feet tall. This thing had to be at least 7.5, maybe 8 feet. It was built like a power lifter, but lanky. Its arms were ridiculously long, hanging down past its knees, ending in hands that looked almost human, but bigger, with thick fingers. The flashlight beam was right on it, and it didn't seem to like that. It didn't flinch or shield its eyes, but it let out this loud huff of air, a cloud of steam in the humid night air that carried that awful smell right to me. Its face. It wasn't an ape's face. It wasn't a man's face. It was something in between. The eyes were deep-set and dark, reflecting the light back at me with a dull, reddish glow. There was no white to them, just dark pits. The brow was heavy, and its mouth was a wide, lipless line. It took a step toward me. It wasn't a fast, aggressive lunge. It was deliberate, heavy. Its foot came down on one of my bean teepees, a bunch of bamboo poles tied together at the top, and just crushed it flat with a sound like a bundle of kindling breaking. It didn't even seem to notice. It just took another step, and then it was out of the garden, standing on my lawn. That's when the terror really locked my legs in place. Up close, the sheer size of it was overwhelming. It was so much bigger than I'd realized. The smell was a physical presence, a foul cloud that made me want to gag. I could see the individual muscles in its shoulders and chest working under that dark, shaggy hair. I could hear its breathing, a low, rumbling sound in its chest. It took another step, closing the distance. It was maybe 30 feet away from me now. My brain was just screaming one word: run, 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 run. But my body wouldn't listen. My knees felt like they were made of water. My hands were shaking so bad, the flashlight beam was jittering all over the thing's chest and face. It stopped. It looked right at me. It opened its mouth, and it growled. It wasn't a sound you just hear. It was a sound you feel, a deep guttural vibration that started in my feet and traveled right up into my chest. It rattled my bones. It was a promise of violence, a sound that said I was nothing. I felt my bladder let go, a hot rush of shame and absolute fear. I couldn't help it. That shock, that humiliating physical reaction, is what finally broke the spell. I stumbled backward, my legs clumsy and weak. I didn't turn my back on it. I couldn't. I just shuffled backward, my eyes locked on it. The flashlight still held out in front of me like a pathetic shield. It watched me retreat. It didn't chase me. It just stood there, a monstrous silhouette against the dark trees. Then it looked down at its hand. I'd forgotten it was even holding anything. It was clutching a few of my corn plants, the ears still on them. It opened its fingers and let them drop to the ruined grass. Then it did something I'll never forget. It brought its two hands together, palm to palm, and slammed them. It wasn't a clap. It was a crack, a single, sharp, explosive sound that echoed in the silent night. It was a warning, a final, unmistakable get lost. It gave one last, loud huff, a blast of that rotten meat breath, turned its massive body with an unnerving grace, and walked into the tree line at the edge of my property. It didn't run, it just vanished into the shadows between the pines. I stood there for I don't know how long, maybe a full minute, just shaking. The crickets started up again, slowly at first, then back to their full chorus, as if nothing had happened. The world had gone back to normal, but I knew it hadn't. Not for me. I finally managed to turn and half walk, half stumble back to the porch. Buddy was still hiding, whining softly. I latched the screen door, then locked the solid wood door behind it. I sat in my chair for the rest of the night, the flashlight still in my hand, staring out into the dark. I didn't sleep a wink. When the sun finally came up, I forced myself to go back outside. The garden was a wreck. It looked like a tractor had driven through it. Corn stalks were broken and ripped out of the ground. Tomatoes were squashed. The bean teepees were just splinters. And in the soft, damp soil of the lawn, there were footprints. They were huge, longer than my foot by a good few inches and wider. They didn't look like a bear's tracks. They were more like a giant human foot. But the toes, they were different. The big toe was set apart, almost like a thumb, and it was huge. The whole print was deep, sunk into the ground like whatever made it weighed a ton. And the smell was still there. That musky, sour stench lingering in the air like a ghost. I called the local game warden later that morning. I told him I had a bear problem, a big one. He came out, looked at the tracks, and got real quiet. He said, "That's no bear, Ron. He took some pictures, but he didn't have any other answers for me. He just told me to be careful. I spent the next week reinforcing that garden fence, making it 6 feet high and burying the bottom foot in the ground. I installed 3 blindingly bright motion sensor lights that cover the whole backyard. I bought a stronger lock for the door. That was 10 years ago. I still live here, but I'm not the same. I don't sit on the porch after dark anymore. If I have to take the trash out at night, I do it fast, my heart in my throat, scanning the tree line the whole time. I always leave the outside lights on, that sense of security I had, the peace of living out here in the woods. It's gone, shattered. Sometimes on a hot, still August night, I'll be lying in bed and the crickets will suddenly go quiet. My whole body will tense up and I'll hold my breath, listening. I never hear the thumps again. I never smell that smell, but I wait for it. I always wait for it, and I know with a cold certainty that settles deep in my gut that it's still out there, and it knows where I live. Story 7. Okay, I'm just going to type this out because I need to get it off my chest, and maybe someone here will believe me or even have had something similar happen. I'm still shook up. And it's been a couple of weeks now, but every time I close my eyes, I hear those sounds again. This all went down on the day I finally told my teacher about what I saw, and we went back to the spot. That day messed me up worse than the first time, if that's even possible. Let me back up a little. A few days before, my friend and I were hiking back from Indian Ford Park in Jennings State Forest. We'd spent the afternoon there, just messing around, skipping stones in the creek and soaking up the last of the sunlight. It was one of those lazy, hazy days where everything feels peaceful, you know. We started heading out as dusk was settling in, following the trail near Hattie Nolan Road. The light was fading fast, casting long shadows through the trees, and the air had that cool, damp smell you only get in deep woods. We were laughing about some stupid joke, not paying much attention, when I spotted something up ahead. About 40 yards away, just off the trail, there was this huge figure standing there. I mean, it was massive, taller than any man I've ever seen, easily 7 feet tall and covered in what looked like tangled, matted hair from head to toe. It was just standing there, not moving, but the way it was positioned made my blood run cold. It didn't look like a bear or anything else I've seen out here. It was too upright, too still. My friend saw it too, and we both froze for a second, our laughter dying in our throats. Then, without a word, we turned and ran. I don't think I've ever run that fast in my life. We didn't stop until we were back near the road, lungs burning, hearts pounding so hard, I thought they'd burst. We didn't talk about it on the way home. We just split up and went our separate ways, like if we didn't say anything, it might not be real. For days, I kept it to myself. I tried to convince myself it was just a trick of the light, or maybe a big animal, but deep down, I knew it wasn't. I couldn't sleep, and every little noise at night had me jumping. Finally, I broke down and told my teacher after class one day. I expected him to laugh or brush it off, but he didn't. He listened quietly, his expression serious, and then he said, "We should go check it out together. He's into outdoors stuff, knows a lot about the forest, and I think he could tell how scared I was." So we planned to go back that same afternoon. Which brings me to the day everything got even weirder. We met up after school, and he drove us out to Jennings State Forest. The whole way there, my stomach was in knots. It was overcast, with a grey sky that made everything feel heavier, and the woods seemed darker than usual, even though it was only around 4 the afternoon. As we pulled up near Hattie Nolan Road, I could feel the dread building up in my chest. We got out of the car, and the air was dead quiet. No birds chirping, no wind rustling the leaves, just this eerie silence that made the hair on my arm stand up. My teacher led the way, and I stuck close to him, my eyes darting around, half expecting to see that figure again. When we reached the spot where my friend and I had seen it, my teacher stopped and started looking around carefully. He pointed at some trees nearby. Their trunks were twisted in a way that didn't look natural, like something huge had wrapped around them and bent them out of shape. There were broken branches scattered on the ground too, not like they'd fallen from a storm, but snapped clean off, some of them way up high. He knelt down and showed me where the soil was disturbed, with deep impressions that didn't match any animal tracks I knew. I felt a chill run down my spine. Seeing it all up close made it real in a way that just hearing about it didn't. My teacher didn't say much, just nodded like he was putting pieces together, and that made me even more nervous. Then he stood up and told me he was going to try something. He took a deep breath and let out this low, deep call. It wasn't like any animal noise I'd heard before, more like a guttural groan that echoed through the trees. For a second, nothing happened, and I almost let out a sigh of relief. But then, from off to our left, maybe 50 yards away, another call answered back. It was identical to his, but deeper, rougher, and it sent a jolt of pure fear through me. My heart started hammering against my ribs, and I could feel the blood drain from my face. Before I could even process it, another reply came from our right, closer this time, and then a third from behind us. It was like we were surrounded. The teacher called out again, his voice a bit shaky now, and each time those replies came back from different directions, moving around us. I could hear them getting closer, the sounds overlapping, and my legs felt weak, like they might give out. I was sweating despite the cool air, and my hands were trembling so bad I had to shove them in my pockets. We stood there for what felt like forever, calling and listening, and every reply made the fear worse. It wasn't just the noise, it was the intelligence behind it, the way it seemed to be communicating, circling us. I kept expecting to see something emerge from the trees, but nothing did. Just those deep, haunting calls that vibrated in my bones. At one point, my teacher whispered for us to get moving back toward the car, and we started walking fast, almost jogging. The whole way, those calls followed us, fading in and out, but never stopping. I didn't look back. I just focused on putting one foot in front of the other, my breath coming in ragged gasps. When we finally reached the car and slammed the doors shut, the silence felt heavy and unnatural. We drove off without saying much, and I spent the whole ride staring out the window, trying to make sense of what happened. Since that day, I haven't been back to those woods. Every time I think about it, I get this cold knot in my stomach, and I can't shake the feeling that whatever was out there is still there, watching, waiting. I don't know what it was, and I probably never will, but that experience changed something in me. The forest used to be a place of peace, but now it's just a reminder of the unseen things lurking in the shadows and the fear that comes with not knowing. Story 8. This was back in late October. I think it was a Saturday. The air had that crisp, cold bite to it that makes your breath fog up, and the leaves were all brown and soggy from recent rains. We were out in this swampy part of Indiana, not far from where my dad grew up. He's been hunting there since he was a kid, so he knows the area like the back of his hand. It's not the kind of place you'd go if you didn't know what you were doing. Thick with cypress trees, muddy ground that sucks at your boots, and this quiet that feels heavy, like the whole place is holding its breath. We were with my dad's friend, a guy he's known for years, and his son, who's around my age. I'm in my early 20s, and the son was maybe a year or two younger. We didn't use names much out there. It was just, hey, or over here, so I'll keep it that way. We were all there for a hunting trip, hoping to bag a deer or maybe some small game. We had our rifles, but the real stars were the dogs, 2 experienced hounds that my dad's friend owned. These dogs were pros. They'd been on dozens of trips, never spooked, always steady. Their barking was usually this confident rhythmic sound that echoed through the trees, letting us know they were on a trail. That morning started like any other. We got to the spot just after sunrise, the sky still pale and grey. The The swamp was quiet, except for the occasional splash from something in the water and the distant caw of crows. We unloaded the truck, checked our gear, and let the dogs loose. They took off into the underbrush, their barks cutting through the silence. For the first couple of hours, everything was normal. We followed the dogs, moving slow and careful, our boots sinking into the mud with each step. The air smelled like damp earth and decay, that familiar swamp scent that clings to your clothes. I remember feeling pretty good, you know. It was one of those days where you're just happy to be outside, away from everything. My dad and his friend were chatting quietly up ahead, and the son and I were lagging behind, scanning the trees. The dogs were doing their thing, barking steady, not too frantic, just keeping on the trail. We'd hear them getting excited now and then, and we'd pick up the pace, thinking they had something cornered. But then, around mid-morning, things started to feel off. It wasn't anything obvious at first. The birds stopped chirping, and the swamp got quieter than usual, like someone had turned down the volume on the world. I didn't think much of it at the time. Sometimes animals just go quiet when hunters are around. But then the dog's barking changed. It went from that steady, confident sound to something higher-pitched, almost frantic. It wasn't the kind of bark they make when they're chasing something. It was scared, panicked. I glanced at my dad, and he had this puzzled look on his face. He held up a hand, signaling us to stop. We all froze, listening. The dogs were yelping now, short, sharp sounds that made the hair on my arms stand up. Then we heard it, a deep, guttural growl that came from somewhere in the trees ahead. It wasn't like any animal I'd ever heard, not a bear, not a hog. Bears have this rough, raspy growl, and hogs are more squealy and aggressive. This was lower, heavier, like it was vibrating through the ground. It felt ancient, if that makes any sense, like something that shouldn't exist. The growl seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. It echoed through the swamp, making the leaves tremble. I felt it in my chest, this deep rumble that made my heart skip a beat. My hands were suddenly cold, and I could feel sweat trickling down my back despite the chill. The dogs went silent for a second, and then they started yelping again, but this time it was pure terror. We could hear them crashing through the underbrush, coming toward us fast. Then we saw movement, something big, really big, shifting behind the trees. It was hard to make out details because of the thick foliage, but I caught glimpses of dark, shaggy fur and this massive shape that stood taller than a man. It wasn't walking. It was moving with this weird, fluid grace, like it was gliding between the trees. The branches snapped and rustled as it passed, and the ground seemed to shake under its weight. The dogs burst out of the bushes right past us. They didn't even look at us, just tore past, their tails between their legs, whining and yelping. I'd never seen them like that. These were brave dogs, dogs that would face down a boar without flinching, and here they were, running for their lives. One of them actually bumped into my leg as it ran by, and I could feel it trembling. That's when the fear really hit me. It was like a cold wave washing over my body. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears, and my breath came in short, ragged gasps. I looked at my dad, and his face was pale, his eyes wide. He didn't say anything, just grabbed my arm and started pulling me back the way we came. His friend and the son were right behind us, their rifles held tight but useless because we couldn't see what we were shooting at. We started running, full-on sprinting through that swamp, mud splashing up our legs, branches whipping at our faces. I didn't look back, but I could hear that growl again, closer this time. It was louder, more aggressive, like whatever it was knew we were there and wasn't happy about it. The sound seemed to follow us, weaving through the trees, and I swear I could feel its breath on my neck, hot and foul-smelling, like rotten meat and wet fur. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of it. Was it a bear? No, bears don't move like that, and they don't growl that deep. A hog? Definitely not. This was something else, something I'd only heard about in stories but never believed. Bigfoot, Sasquatch, whatever you want to call it. In that moment, it didn't matter what it was called. It was real, and it was terrifying. We stumbled and slipped in the mud, our boots making sucking sounds with every step. I remember tripping over a root and nearly falling, but my dad yanked me up without breaking stride. His grip was so tight it hurt, but I was grateful for it. The sun was panting hard, his face slick with sweat, and his dad kept shouting, "Go, go, go!" But it was mostly just noise over the sound of our own panic. The truck felt like it was miles away, even though we'd only been walking for an hour or so earlier. Time seemed to stretch out, each second lasting forever. I kept expecting to feel something grab me from behind, or to see that thing step out in front of us. But we just kept running, our lungs burning, our legs aching. The growls faded after a while, but the silence that followed was almost worse. It felt like we were being watched, like eyes were on us from every direction. When we finally broke through the trees and saw the truck parked on the dirt road, it was the biggest relief of my life. We scrambled toward it, fumbling with the doors. My dad's hands were shaking so bad he could barely get the key in the ignition. We all piled in, me in the passenger seat, his friend and the son in the back. The dogs were already there, huddled together in the truck bed, trembling and whining. One of them had its head tucked under its paws like it was trying to hide. We sat there for a minute, just breathing, the windows fogging up from our panting. No one said anything at first. We just stared out at the trees, half expecting to see that thing come charging out. But nothing happened. The swamp was quiet again, too quiet. My dad finally started the engine, and the sound of it was jarring after all that silence. He put the truck in gear and we sped off, bouncing down the dirt road, not looking back. The drive home was tense. No one talked much. We just kept glancing at each other, then out the windows, like we were afraid it might be following us. The dogs stayed curled up in the back, still shaking. I remember reaching back to pet one of them, and it flinched away from my touch. That hit me hard. These dogs were part of the family, and whatever we'd encountered had broken them. When we got back to my dad's friend's place, we unloaded the dogs, and they went straight to their kennel, not even wanting food or water. We sat around the kitchen table, drinking coffee that tasted like ash, trying to process what happened. My dad's friend kept saying, "What the hell was that?" over and over, but no one had an answer. We talked about bears and hogs, but we all knew it wasn't either of those. The growl, the size, the way it moved, it wasn't natural, not in any way we understood. I've replayed that day in my head 1,000 times since then, the way the dog's barks changed, the deepness of that growl, the shadowy shape in the trees. I've tried to rationalize it, to find some explanation, but I can't. It's left me with this unease that I can't shake. I don't go hunting in that area anymore, and neither does my dad. His friend sold the dogs not long after, said he couldn't bear to see them so scared all the time. Sometimes, when I'm lying in bed at night, I'll hear a noise outside, and my heart will start racing. I'll remember that feeling of being watched, of something ancient and powerful moving through the trees, and I'll wonder if it's still out there. I don't know what we encountered that day, but I know it was real, and I know it changed us. And that's the part that stays with me, not knowing and never being able to forget. Story 9. All right, so I've been sitting on this for a while, but I need to get it out there. Maybe someone else has been through something similar, because what happened to me that day in the woods of Indiana still messes with my head. I've told a few people, but most just shrug it off or laugh, like my wife did. She thinks I'm exaggerating or that I saw a bear or something, but I know what I saw, and it wasn't any bear. It was something else entirely, and the memory of it haunts me every time I close my eyes. It was a warm, humid morning in late August. I remember because the air was thick with moisture and the sun hadn't quite burned through the haze yet. I decided to go out to this spot I frequent for target practice, a secluded area in the Hoosier National Forest, about an hour from my house. I've been going there for years. It's quiet, away from trails, and I never run into anyone else. That day, I packed up my .22 rifle, some targets, and a few boxes of ammo. Nothing fancy, just me in the woods, like always. I parked my truck on the gravel pull-off near the old logging road and hiked in about half a mile. The path was overgrown in spots, but I knew it well. The ground was soft from recent rains, and my boots sank a little with each step. I could hear birds chirping and the occasional rustle of squirrels in the underbrush. Everything felt normal, peaceful even. I set up my targets on a fallen log, some paper plates I'd drawn circles on, and stepped back about 50 yards. The first few shots were crisp and clean, the sound echoing through the trees. I remember feeling relaxed, focused on my breathing and my aim. It was just another day out in nature. But then, maybe 20 minutes in, I caught a whiff of something foul. At first, I thought it was a dead animal nearby. Maybe a deer that had been taken down by coyotes. I've come across that before, and the smell is unmistakable. Rot and decay. But this was different. It was stronger, more pungent, like a mix of spoiled meat and something earthy, almost like wet dog, but way worse. It hit me in waves, and each time it did, my stomach turned. I tried to ignore it at first, thinking it would pass, but it only got stronger, like whatever was causing it was getting closer. I lowered my rifle and looked around. The woods were still quiet, but now the silence felt heavy, oppressive. The birds had stopped singing and the squirrels were gone. That's when I started to feel uneasy. I've spent enough time in the woods to know when something's off, and this was definitely off. I decided to check it out, mostly out of curiosity, but also because the smell was making it hard to concentrate. I figured if it was a dead animal, I could move away from it and continue shooting. I pushed through a thicket of brush, my boots crunching on twigs and leaves. The smell was overwhelming now, so bad that I had to breathe through my mouth. My heart was starting to beat a little faster, and I felt a prickle of sweat on my neck. I remember thinking, this is stupid, just turn back. But I kept going, drawn by some morbid curiosity. After about 30 feet, I parted a cluster of young saplings and froze. There, crouched behind a large oak tree, was this massive animal. I say animal because I don't know what else to call it, but it was like nothing I'd ever seen. It was huge, easily 7 feet tall if it stood up, with broad, hunched shoulders that looked like they were made of muscle. Its fur was dark, almost black, and matted in places. It was crouched low, like it was hiding or waiting, and its head was turned toward me. But the worst part was its eyes. They were big and dark, and they locked onto mine the second I saw it. Time seemed to stop. We just stared at each other for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only a few seconds. I could see every detail, the way its fur bristled, the deep-set eyes that seemed too intelligent for an animal, the sheer size of it. My breath caught in my throat, and I felt a cold dread wash over me. My hands were trembling, and I realized I was still holding my rifle, but it felt useless, like a toy. This thing was so close I could see the moisture on its fur from the humidity, and the smell was coming from it, a thick, rancid odor that made my eyes water. I didn't know what to do. Fight or flight kicked in, but I was frozen. Then, almost on instinct, I took a step back. I didn't turn around. I just started to retreat slowly, my eyes still locked on it. That's when it moved. In one fluid motion, it straightened up, on 2 legs, and bolted past me, not at me, but past me, like it was fleeing too. The speed was incredible, unnatural. It crashed through the underbrush, snapping branches like they were toothpicks, and the sound was deafening. I felt the rush of air as it passed, close enough that I could feel the heat from its body and smell that awful stench intensified. I stumbled backward, my heart pounding so hard I thought it would burst out of my chest. I fell on my ass, scrambling to get up, my rifle clattering to the ground. I didn't even think to grab it. I just wanted to get out of there. I turned and ran, not looking back, branches whipping at my face and arms. I could hear it moving through the trees, the crashes fading into the distance, but I didn't stop until I reached my truck. My lungs were burning, and I was covered in sweat and scratches. I fumbled with the keys, my hands shaking so bad I could barely get the door open. I jumped in, locked the doors, and sat there for a good 10 minutes, just trying to catch my breath. The drive home was a blur. I kept checking my rearview mirror, half expecting to see it following me. When I got home, my wife was in the kitchen, and I must have looked like hell because she asked what was wrong. I told her everything, stumbling over my words, and she laughed. She said it was probably a big buck or a bear, and that I'd spooked myself, but I know what I saw. Bears don't stand and run on two legs like that, and they sure as hell don't have that kind of speed or size. And the smell, I'll never forget that smell. I didn't go back to those woods for 9 months. Every time I thought about it, my skin would crawl. When I finally did return, I brought a 12-gauge shotgun loaded with slugs. I didn't see anything that day, but I felt watched the whole time. And I left after only an hour. I still don't know what that thing was, but I know it was real. And I know it's still out there. Story 10. All right. Ivy never told this to anyone outside of a couple of close friends and the one investigator who reached out years later. Typing it out now, my hands are still a little shaky. It's not something you forget. It carves a place in your brain and just lives there. This was back in the late summer, maybe early September. I don't remember the exact date, just that it was a Friday. My girlfriend at the time, let's just call her Sarah, and I was staying at her family's old place near Lake Sullivan in Indiana. It wasn't a vacation home or anything fancy, just a small kind of run-down house on a decent chunk of land they used mostly for storage and the occasional weekend getaway. We were young, broke, and it was a free place to spend a couple of nights away from the city. The day itself was totally normal, almost boring. We'd driven up in my beat-up truck, unpacked some groceries, and just lazed around. The house smelled like old wood and dust. We made some dinner, hot dogs and beans on the stove, and just hung out, listening to the radio because the TV only got static. As it got dark, we went out onto the back porch. The air was cool and heavy, the kind that promises rain. You could smell it coming, that wet earth smell. The backyard wasn't huge. It had a rusty swing set, a tool shed that was leaning to one side, and a decent-sized vegetable garden that had mostly gone to weed. Beyond the garden was a wire fence, and on the other side of that, a massive soybean field that seemed to go on forever, just a black ocean once the sun went down. The only thing cutting through that darkness was a single yard light on a tall pole near the corner of the property. It was one of those yellowish sodium vapor lights that buzzes and throws this sickly orange glow, making long dancing shadows everywhere. We were just sitting on the porch steps, sharing a beer, talking about nothing important. The plan was to maybe have a small fire in the pit later if the rain held off. It was so quiet, the kind of deep country quiet where you can hear your own heartbeat. The only sounds were the buzz of the light and the crickets. Even they sounded lazy. Sarah was the first one to notice the horses. There were 2 of them in a paddock on the neighbor's property, maybe a couple 100 yards away, silhouetted against the slightly less dark sky. They'd been calm all evening, but suddenly they started getting agitated. We heard it before we saw it properly, this nervous snorting, the sound of hooves shuffling quickly in the dirt. We stood up, trying to see what was spooking them. At first, I thought it might be a coyote or a deer. Then we saw it. Under that yellow yard light, right at the edge of the soybean field where the light met the darkness, something stood up. It wasn't a deer, it wasn't a bear. I've seen bears. This was different. It was massive. I'm 6 feet tall, and this thing made me feel like a child. It had to be at least 8 feet tall, maybe more. It was just this huge, dark, hairy shape. The light from behind it sort of outlined its body in a fuzzy orange halo, but I couldn't make out any features on its face, just a dark patch where a face should be. My brain just froze. It was like someone had hit a pause button on the whole world. The crickets stopped. The only sound was the electric hum of the light and the frantic shuffling of the horses. Sarah's hand clamped onto my arm, her nails digging in so hard I could feel it through my jacket. She didn't say anything. She just made this tiny, choked sound in the back of her throat, like all the air had been squeezed out of her. We were maybe 70, 80 yards away, far enough that we should have been safe, but it felt like we were right next to it. The sheer size of it was just impossible. It was broad, with these huge shoulders that sloped down to long, thick arms. The hair wasn't like a grizzly's. It was longer, shaggier, like a wet dog, and it was a dark brown, almost black in that light. It was just standing there, facing us. I know it was looking right at us. You can feel that. You can feel when something that big has its attention on you. It was a physical pressure, a weight in the air. My stomach dropped into my shoes. This wasn't curiosity. This was a primal, knee-shaking terror. Every instinct in my body was screaming at me to run, to get inside, to hide, but my legs felt like they were made of concrete. I was literally rooted to the spot, just staring. Then it moved. It turned its head slightly, and I saw the profile, a heavy brow, no visible neck, just this powerful mass. It took a step, not towards us, but parallel to the fence. It moved with this unnerving, fluid grace. It didn't lumber. It was smooth, powerful. It walked right up to the 4-foot-tall wire fence that separated the yard from the soybean field. And it stepped over it. I'll never forget that. It didn't climb it, it didn't vault it, it didn't even break its stride. It just lifted one leg and then the other, like the fence was a curb. It was the most casual, dismissive display of power I have ever seen. That fence was meant to keep deer out. To this thing, it was nothing. An inconvenience not even worth acknowledging. The moment it cleared the fence and its feet sank into the soft dirt of the soybean field, it paused again. It was half in the light, half in the shadow now. It turned its head one more time, and I swear I felt its gaze lock onto us again. It was just for a second, but it felt like an hour. Then it took one long stride into the soybeans and was gone. It didn't run, it just vanished into the sea of blackness. The second it disappeared, the spell broke. The crickets started up again. My lungs remembered how to work, and I sucked in a huge, ragged breath. My heart was hammering against my ribs so hard I thought it would crack them. "What was that?" Sarah whispered, her voice trembling and thin. "What the hell was that?" I didn't have an answer. I just shook my head, my own hands trembling uncontrollably. We stood there for another minute, maybe two, just staring at the spot where it had been, half expecting it to come back out. The soybeans were still. The only movement was the swaying of the plants in the light breeze. Then the rain started, just a few fat drops at first, splattering on the porch roof. The smell of wet dust filled the air. "We need to get inside," I said, and my voice didn't even sound like my own. It was hoarse, strained. We practically fell through the back door, slamming it shut and locking it. We locked the front door too, and then checked all the windows on the ground floor, pulling the curtains shut. We didn't speak. We just moved in a frantic, silent panic. We ended up sitting on the floor in the living room, backs against the wall, listening. The rain started coming down harder, a steady drumming on the roof. We must have sat there for an hour, just listening to the rain and the wind, jumping at every little creak the old house made. The initial shock had worn off, replaced by a deep, cold dread that had settled in my bones. What had we just seen? My mind was racing through every possibility. Bear, guy in a suit, some weird prank, but nothing fit. The size, the way it moved, the way it stepped over that fence, it was all wrong. It was something else. Eventually, the need to know, to see some kind of proof, overpowered the fear. Or maybe I just needed to prove to myself that I hadn't lost my mind. "I'm going to look," I said, getting to my feet. Sarah's eyes went wide. "No, don't, please." "I have to. I'll just go to the porch. I won't go past the light." I grabbed the biggest flashlight I could find from a kitchen drawer. It was heavy, metal, and felt useless as a weapon, but it was better than nothing. I unlocked the back door and stepped out onto the porch. The rain was coming down in sheets now, blowing sideways under the porch roof, soaking my jeans. The yard light was still on, its glow blurred and distorted by the downpour. I shone the flashlight beam towards the fence. The world was a mess of rain and shadows. I could see the spot where it had stepped over. The soybeans were trampled and broken there, a clear path leading into the field. My heart was in my throat again. I swept the beam along the fence line, and that's when I saw the dirt, right where it had stepped over, on our side of the fence. The ground was all torn up. It wasn't just a footprint. It was a mess of deep gouges and disturbed earth, like something incredibly heavy had pushed off from that spot. The rain was already washing it away, filling the depressions with muddy water. Any chance of a clear track was gone. I panned the light to the left, towards the neighbor's property, and my blood went cold. There was a rabbit hutch there, maybe 50 yards from where the thing had been standing. We'd seen it earlier in the day, a little wooden cage with a wire mesh front. Now, it was destroyed. The wooden frame was splintered. The wire mesh was ripped and twisted back like it was made of paper. There was no sign of the rabbits, nothing, just wreckage. That's when the full reality of it hit me. This wasn't just some weird animal. This thing had torn that hutch apart. The force required to do that. It was terrifying. I stood there in the pouring rain, the flashlight beam shaking in my hand, staring at the destruction. The horses were still gone, probably sheltered in their barn, but the silence from their paddock felt accusing. I went back inside, dripping wet and shivering. I didn't even have to say anything to Sarah. She took one look at my face and knew. I told her about the dirt and the rabbit hutch. We didn't sleep at all that night. We just sat in that living room with the lights on, listening to the storm, every noise from outside making us flinch. We were prisoners in that little house, too scared to even look out the window. The next morning, in the grey, wet daylight, everything looked different. The world seemed normal again. The rain had washed everything clean. The gouges in the dirt by the fence were just muddy puddles. The broken rabbit hutch was still there, a stark, ugly reminder in the calm morning light. We packed our stuff in a hurry and left. We didn't talk about it much on the drive home. What was there to say? A few years later, a guy who investigates this kind of stuff found us through a mutual friend who'd heard the story. He interviewed us separately. He said our stories were consistent, down to the smallest details, the way it stepped over the fence, the shaggy hair, the spooked horses, the destroyed hutch. He went out to the property and took photos of the area. He said the evidence, while circumstantial, was compelling. The lack of clear tracks didn't surprise him. The rain had seen to that. But none of that really matters. The evidence, the corroboration, it doesn't change what happened. It doesn't erase the memory of that thing standing under the yellow light, the feeling of its gaze, the casual, terrifying power in its movement. I go about my life. I have a job, a family, but sometimes when I'm out in the woods or it's a particularly dark and quiet night, I remember. I remember the sheer size of it, the way it just stepped over that fence like it was nothing, and the cold, absolute certainty that we were in the presence of something we were not meant to see. And I still get chills. Story 11. That night, I was on my usual route, patrolling Highway 37 near Libby. It's a lonely stretch of road, mostly dark and quiet, with thick woods on either side. Not much traffic out there after 10 p.m., especially on a weeknight. I'd been doing this job for over a decade by then, so I was used to the solitude. You get into a rhythm, drive, watch for anything out of the ordinary, maybe pull over someone speeding now and then, but mostly it's just you and the empty road, the hum of the engine, and the glow of your headlights cutting through the darkness. I remember checking the clock on the dashboard. It was around 11:40 p.m. I'd just passed a small turnoff and was thinking about heading back toward town soon. The road was slick in spots from earlier snowmelt, but nothing too bad. My mind was drifting a little, I'll admit, thinking about my shift ending, maybe grabbing a coffee before heading home. Nothing special. Then, out of nowhere, something moved in the ditch to my right. At first, I thought it was a deer. We get a lot of them around here, and they'll dart across the road without warning. But this was different. It wasn't low to the ground like a deer. It rose up, real slow and deliberate, from the ditch. My heart jumped into my throat and I slammed on the brakes. The tires squealed a bit and the car shuddered to a stop. And there, right in my headlights, was this thing. I'm not exaggerating when I say it was over 8 feet tall, massive shoulders, like a football player on steroids, and covered in coarse dark hair that looked almost black in the light. Its face was broad and flat, not like any animal I've ever seen. But the worst part was the eyes. They were red, glowing red, like 2 hot coals staring right at me. It didn't look angry or aggressive, just calm, unafraid. It crossed the road in 3 steps. 3 steps, and it covered both lanes like it was nothing. I mean, I've seen bears walk on 2 legs, but this wasn't a bear. Bears don't move like that, smooth and upright, with this powerful grace that made my skin crawl. It paused on the opposite shoulder, turned its head, and glanced back at me. Just for a second, then it disappeared into the trees, like it had never been there at all. The whole thing lasted maybe 8 to 10 seconds, but it felt like an eternity. I sat there, frozen, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles were white. The car was silent except for the idle rumble of the engine. And then the smell hit me. It was this strong, musky odor, like wet fur mixed with something rotten, like decay. It filled the car, even with the windows up, and I had to fight the urge to gag. That smell, it stuck in my nose for hours afterward. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my ears. I've been in scary situations before. Domestic disputes, car chases, you name it. But this was different. This was primal fear. The kind that makes your stomach drop and your legs feel like jelly. I stayed there for what felt like minutes, just staring at the spot where it had vanished. The woods were dark and thick, and I couldn't see a thing beyond the tree line. Part of me wanted to get out and look, but another part was screaming at me to stay put. After a few deep breaths, I forced myself to move. I grabbed my flashlight and radioed in, my voice shaky. I didn't say what I'd seen, just that I'd had an incident and was checking it out. Then I got out of the car. The cold air hit me like a slap, and that smell was even stronger outside. It hung in the air, thick and heavy. I walked over to where the thing had crossed, my boots crunching on the gravel shoulder. That's when I saw the footprints. They were deep, like something heavy had pressed into the damp ground. Each one was about 18 inches long, and the stride between them was a good 5 feet. I've measured footprints before, deer, elk, even bear, but these were nothing like that. They were human-like, but way too big, with a shape that didn't match any animal I know. I took photos with my phone, my hands trembling so bad I almost dropped it a couple of times. The whole time, I kept glancing at the woods, half expecting those red eyes to appear again. I spent maybe 20 minutes out there, documenting everything. The footprints led from the ditch, across the road, and into the trees. I didn't follow them far, just enough to see where they started and ended. The ground was soft from the cold, so the impressions were clear. I could see the details, like the way the toes dug in. It was surreal, like something out of a nightmare, but it was real. The evidence was right there in front of me. Back in the car, I sat for a while longer, trying to process it. My mind was racing. What the hell was that? A bear? No way. Bears don't walk upright like that for long, and they sure as hell don't have glowing red eyes. A person in a costume, in the middle of nowhere, at almost midnight in freezing temperatures. That didn't make sense either. And the smell, that wasn't something you can fake. It was organic, wild. I drove back to the station slowly, my hands still shaking on the wheel. Every shadow on the road made me jump. I kept replaying the image in my head. That thing rising from the ditch, crossing the road, pausing to look back. Its movement was so confident, like it owned the place. It wasn't scared of me or the car. That's what got to me. The sheer power and lack of fear. When I got to the station, I filed a report. I didn't use the word Sasquatch at first. I just described what I saw and the evidence, but deep down I knew. I'd heard stories from other folks in the area, people talking about Bigfoot sightings, and I'd always brushed them off as tall tales or misidentifications. Now, I wasn't so sure. The footprints were the clincher. They were too precise, too consistent to be a hoax, and the stride, 5 feet. No human could do that without running. The rest of that night was a blur. I went home, but I didn't sleep much. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those red eyes staring back at me. The smell seemed to linger in my clothes, even after I changed. I felt unsettled, like something had shifted in my world. I'd always thought of myself as a practical guy, someone who deals in facts, but this didn't fit into any box I knew. In the days that followed, I went back to that spot a couple of times. The footprints were still there for a while, until it rained and washed them away. I talked to a few other deputies, ones I trusted, and some of them admitted they'd heard similar stories. But nobody had seen what I saw. Nobody had that image burned into their brain. Even now, years later, I think about it. Not all the time, but when I'm driving at night, or when I smell something musky in the air, it comes rushing back. That creature, moving under my headlights, so calm and sure of itself, I never saw it again, and part of me is glad. But another part wonders what it was, where it came from, and why it was there that night. I guess I'll never have answers. All I have is the memory, the footprints in my photos, and the report buried in some file. It's not something I talk about much because people might think I'm nuts. But I know what I saw, and I know it was real. And every now and then, when I'm out on Highway 37, I slow down near that spot, just in case. But it's always quiet, always dark, like nothing ever happened, but I know it did. Story 12. We'd hit up all the usual houses, the ones with the cool decorations and the folks who gave out full-sized candy bars, and our bags were pretty heavy by the end. It was getting late, and we were all tired but still buzzing from the sugar. To save time getting back to my place, which was on the other side of the neighborhood, we decided to cut through the woods instead of taking the long way around on the streets. We'd done it before during the day, and it never seemed like a big deal. The woods behind the houses aren't like a park or anything. They're wild, thick with trees, and they stretch on for what feels like forever once you're in there. That night the moon was out, but it was one of those thin, waxy moons that doesn't give much light, just enough to cast weird shadows and make everything look kind of fuzzy and unreal. As soon as we stepped off the road and into the trees, the air changed. It got colder, and the sounds from the neighborhood, the distant laughter, cars driving by, just faded away like someone had turned down the volume. Everything went quiet, but not a peaceful quiet. It was this heavy, dead silence that made the hair on my arms stand up. I remember feeling this knot in my stomach, like I'd made a mistake, but I didn't want to say anything because my friends seemed fine, and I didn't want to be the one to chicken out. We were walking in a loose group, me in the middle, with our candy bags swinging in our hands. The ground was covered in leaves, and every step made this crunching sound that seemed way too loud in the stillness. We'd only been walking for a few minutes when I started noticing little things that set me on edge. The trees were so close together that the moonlight barely reached the ground, and the shadows moved in ways that didn't make sense. Like I'd see something shift out of the corner of my eye, but when I turned to look, there was nothing there. My heart was already beating a little faster, and I kept telling myself it was just my imagination, that Halloween was getting to me. But then the sounds started. At first, it was just the normal rustling you'd expect, maybe a squirrel or a bird settling in for the night. But then there was this one snap, like a branch breaking, and it wasn't off in the distance. It was right beside us, to our right. We all froze at the same time. I mean, just stopped dead in our tracks. My friend on my right, he was the first to react. His eyes went wide, and he whispered, "What was that?" But none of us answered. We just stood there, listening, and for a second everything was quiet again. Then another branch snapped, louder this time, like something big was moving through the undergrowth. I could feel my breath catching in my throat, and my hands were sweating so much I almost dropped my candy bag. That's when I saw it, a dark shape stepping out from behind a tree maybe 20 feet away. At first, my brain couldn't process what I was looking at. It was tall, like really tall, over 7 feet, I'd guess. And it was just standing there, half hidden by the shadows. But as it moved forward a little, the moon caught it, and I could see it clearly. It had this shaggy, dark hair all over its body, like a bear but not quite, and its arms were long, hanging down almost to its knees. Its chest was broad and muscular, and it moved with this slow, deliberate grace that felt completely alien. The head was what got me, though. It was sloped, not human at all, with no neck to speak of, and even from that distance, I could feel its eyes on me. They weren't like animal eyes, they were piercing, like they were looking right through me, and I felt this cold dread wash over me that I've never felt before or since. We were all just staring, paralyzed, and I remember thinking, this can't be real. But it was. The thing shifted its weight, leaning forward slightly like it was deciding what to do next. And that's when one of my friends snapped. He didn't say anything, just let out this strangled gasp and took off running. That broke the spell, and suddenly we were all running too, scrambling through the woods like our lives depended on it. I dropped my candy bag without even thinking about it. I heard it hit the ground, and the sound of candy scattering everywhere was drowned out by the pounding of our feet and our ragged breathing. I've never run that fast in my life. My legs were burning, and I could feel branches whipping against my face and arms. But I didn't care. All I could think was, don't look back, don't look back. But I did. I couldn't help it. I glanced over my shoulder and I saw it step into a patch of moonlight, just standing there, watching us flee. It didn't chase us. It just stood there, and somehow that was even scarier. Like it knew we weren't a threat. Or maybe it was just letting us go. I don't know. But that image is burned into my brain. The way it stood, so still and massive, with those eyes fixed on us. We didn't stop running until we burst out of the woods and onto the road, collapsing on the pavement, gasping for air. My chest felt like it was on fire, and I was shaking so hard I could barely stand. My friends were in the same state. One of them was crying, and the other was just repeating, "What was that? What was that?" Over and over, we tried to tell the first adult we saw, a neighbor who was out checking his mail, but he just laughed and said we'd probably seen a deer or something and let our imaginations run wild. But we knew it wasn't a deer. Deer don't stand 7 feet tall, and they don't have eyes that make you feel like you're being studied. We ended up going back to my house, and my mom could tell something was wrong because we were all pale and shaky. We tried to explain, but she just patted our heads and said we'd had a long night and needed to calm down. I didn't sleep much that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that thing in the woods, and I'd jolt awake, heart racing. For weeks after, I had nightmares about it, and I refused to go anywhere near those woods, even during the day. My friends and I didn't talk about it much after that. It was like we had this unspoken agreement to pretend it never happened, but it changed us. We weren't as carefree anymore. We'd get nervous if we heard a strange noise at night, and Halloween lost its magic for me. Even now, years later, I can't explain what we saw. I've looked up Bigfoot stories online, and some of them sound similar, but it doesn't make it any less terrifying. What gets me is that it didn't chase us. It just watched us run. Like it was curious, or maybe it was warning us to stay away. I'll never know, and that's the part that haunts me the most. Sometimes when I'm driving past those woods at night, I'll catch a glimpse of the trees and feel that same chill, like it's still out there waiting, and I know I'll never set foot in those woods again. Not for anything. Story 13? Okay, so I've been sitting on this for a while. But I need to get it out. I've never told anyone the whole thing, not even my wife, because honestly, who'd believe me? But I figure if I post it here, maybe someone else has had something similar happen. I'm a pretty grounded guy, 46 years old, been fishing since I was a kid, live in Spokane, Washington. I'm not the type to make up stories or believe in crazy stuff. But what happened that day in October 2016 on the Kettle River changed how I see things. It was just a normal fishing trip, or so I thought. That morning I woke up early, around 5:30, because I wanted to get to the river before the sun was fully up. I've always loved fly fishing. There's something peaceful about it, just you and the water and the sound of the line whipping through the air. The Kettle River in northeastern Washington is one of my favorite spots because it's remote. Not many people go out there, especially in the fall. The air was cool and the sky was overcast, the kind of grey that makes everything feel quiet and still. I remember driving out there in my truck. The roads were empty, and I was just thinking about how good it would be to catch some trout. I parked at my usual pull-off, grabbed my gear, and hiked down to this gravel bar I like. It's a wide, flat area next to the river, with big stones and pebbles that crunch under your boots, and the forest comes right up to the edge. It feels like you're the only person in the world. I set up my rod, tied on a fly, and started casting. The river was running steady, not too fast, and the water was clear enough to see the rocks on the bottom. I waded in a little, up to my knees, and the cold seeped through my waders. But it was that good kind of cold that wakes you up. For the first hour or so, nothing much happened. I caught a small rainbow trout, released it, and just enjoyed the solitude. The only sounds were the river gurgling, the wind rustling the pine trees, and occasional bird calls. It was so calm that I almost forgot about everything else, work, bills, all that stuff. I was just in the moment. Then, around 8 o'clock, I started feeling something weird. At first I thought it was just the wind picking up, but it wasn't that. It was like a low vibration, the kind you feel in your chest more than hear. I stopped casting and stood still, listening. The rustling in the forest got louder, not like leaves blowing, but heavy, like something big was moving through the underbrush. I figured it might be a bear or a moose. I've seen both out here before, so I wasn't too worried, but I stayed alert. I reeled in my line and took a step back toward the gravel bar, just in case. That's when everything went from peaceful to insane, in seconds. The rustling turned into crashing sounds like branches snapping, and then this white-tailed deer burst out of the trees. It wasn't running gracefully. It was terrified, stumbling over itself, eyes wide with panic. It hit the gravel bar at full speed, kicking up stones, and without hesitating, it plunged right into the river. The water splashed everywhere, and the deer started swimming frantically across, its head bobbing up and down. But what came out of the forest after it made my blood run cold? This thing, I don't even know how to describe it without sounding crazy, was huge. It stood upright, like a person, but it was over 7 feet tall, maybe even 8. Its chest was broad, and it was covered in dark, wet-looking hair that clung to its body. It moved fast, not like a bear on all fours, but running on 2 legs, and it was powerful. I could hear its footsteps thudding on the ground, heavy and solid. It followed the deer right into the river, splashing in with a force that sent waves toward me. The water came up to its waist, and it waded after the deer, its arms swinging. I was frozen. I couldn't move, couldn't even breathe properly. My heart was pounding so hard, I felt it in my throat. I just stood there, knee-deep in the river, my fishing rod hanging limp in my hand. The creature was focused on the deer. But then, as it got a little downstream, it paused. It stopped wading and turned its head toward me. Not its whole body, just its head, and it looked right at me. Its face was dark, with deep-set eyes that I couldn't really see clearly, but I felt its gaze. It was intelligent, not like an animal's blank stare. Then it let out this guttural huff, like a deep, angry breath that carried over the sound of the river. It wasn't a roar or a scream, but it was loud and full of force, and it vibrated through me. I felt a chill go down my spine and my hands started shaking. The whole thing probably lasted less than a minute, but it felt like forever. The deer managed to scramble out on the other side and disappeared into the trees, and the creature seemed to lose interest. It turned back and continued wading downstream for a bit, then climbed out onto the opposite bank. It moved with this eerie grace for something so big, and it vanished into the forest without making much noise. Just like that, it was gone. I stayed where I was for what felt like ages, just trembling. The river kept flowing, and the sounds of nature slowly returned. But everything felt different. The peace was shattered. I finally managed to wade back to the gravel bar, my legs feeling like jelly. I sat down on a big rock, my gear forgotten, and just tried to process what I'd seen. My mind was racing. Was that a bear? No, bears don't run upright like that, and they're not that tall. A person in a costume out here? That made no sense. The more I thought about it, the more I realized it had to be what people call Sasquatch. I'd heard stories, but I always brushed them off as nonsense. Now, I wasn't so sure. After a while, I forced myself to get up and look around. I walked over to where the deer had burst out of the trees, and that's when I saw the footprints. They were in the soft mud and gravel near the water's edge, and they were massive, human-like, but bigger than any human foot I've ever seen. Each print was at least 18 inches long, with 5 toes, and the impressions were deep, like whatever made them was heavy. I crouched down to look closer, and my stomach churned. They were fresh, and the spacing between them showed it had been running. I followed the trail a little, but it disappeared into the forest where the creature had gone. Then I noticed the smell. It was musky, like wet dog mixed with something earthy, almost like damp soil after rain. It hung in the air around the area, and it was strong enough to make my nose wrinkle. I've been in the woods my whole life, and I've never smelled anything like that. It wasn't a bear smell. Bears have a distinct odor, but this was different, more pungent, more wild. I stood there, breathing it in, and it just confirmed everything. This wasn't my imagination. It was real. I packed up my gear in a hurry, my hands still shaking. I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see it again. The hike back to my truck felt longer than usual, and every little sound in the forest made me jump. When I got to the truck, I threw my stuff in the back and drove off without even stopping to take off my waders. I didn't look back. For the rest of that fishing season, I avoided that spot. I went to other parts of the river, but it wasn't the same. Every time I was out there, I'd get this uneasy feeling like I was being watched. I'd hear rustling and my heart would race. I never saw anything like that again, but the memory is burned into my mind. The sheer size of that thing, the way it moved, the sound it made, it's all still vivid, like it happened yesterday. I've gone over it in my head 1,000 times, trying to make sense of it, but I can't. I'm not a believer in monsters or ghosts, but I know what I saw. It was a predator, hunting, and I was just in the wrong place at the wrong time. Sometimes I wonder if the deer would have made it if I hadn't been there, or if my presence distracted the creature. But mostly, I just feel lucky that it didn't come after me. That guttural huff, it felt like a warning, like it was telling me to stay out of its way. So yeah, that's my story. I still fish, but I stick to more populated areas now. Every now and then, when I'm out in the woods, I get a whiff of that musky smell or hear something heavy moving, and I freeze. It's been years, but the fear is still there. I don't talk about it much because people would think I'm crazy, but I had to share it somewhere. If anyone else has experienced something like this, I'd love to hear it. For now, I'm just left with this memory that I can't shake, and the knowledge that there are things out there we don't understand. Story 14. It was one of those thick, humid Ohio afternoons in late July. the kind where the air feels like a warm, wet blanket the second you step outside. I was 13 years old, and the summer stretched out in front of me like an endless, boring road. My parents had dropped me off at my grandparents' farm for 2 weeks, like they did every summer. I loved it there usually. It was freedom. But that day, the freedom turned into something else entirely. I'd been riding my bike up and down the gravel lane for what felt like hours, just killing time. The bike was an old Schwinn, red with a rusty chain that clicked in a steady rhythm. I remember the seat was cracked, and the vinyl pinched the back of my legs if I wasn't careful. I was wearing just a pair of faded blue shorts and a t-shirt that was already sticking to my back with sweat. My grandpa was out fixing a fence on the west pasture, and my grandma was in the kitchen canning something that made the whole house smell like sugar and vinegar. I was on my own, and I was bored. So I decided to go further than I usually did, down past the big barn to the hill that overlooked the alfalfa field. That hill was my favorite. It was steep and long, and if you got a good run up, you could coast all the way down without pedaling once, the wind whipping through your hair. I remember pushing off from the top, the initial wobble of the tires on the loose gravel, and then the smooth, silent rush as I picked up speed. The clicking of the chains stopped, and all I could hear was the wind in my ears and the hum of the tires on the hard-packed dirt path. I remember the feeling of my stomach lifting, that little thrill of speed. I was just a kid on a bike, you know, not a care in the world. My eyes were watering from the wind, and I had to squint. That's when I saw it, down at the lower edge of the alfalfa field, where the neat rows of green met the tangled dark line of the woods. At first I thought it was a shadow, a weird, tall shadow from one of the big oaks. But the sun was high, there weren't any long shadows. Then I thought it was one of my grandpa's cows. But it was in the wrong field, and it was walking wrong. This thing was massive. I can't stress that enough. It was huge. It was covered in this coarse, dark brown hair, like a wet dog, but on a scale I couldn't comprehend. It was walking upright on 2 legs, but with a heavy, hunched posture, like its shoulders were carrying a tremendous weight. Its frame was thick, solid. This was nothing like a bear. I'd seen bears before on TV and once at a distance in a state park. Bears have a different shape. They're lower to the ground. Their legs are built different. This thing was built like a man, but a man made out of tree trunks and muscle. A shaggy, monstrous man. My brain just sort of stuttered. It couldn't process what I was seeing. I was still coasting down the hill, just gliding, and my momentum was carrying me closer to it. The distance between us was shrinking, and I could see it more clearly with every second. The way it moved was fluid, but powerful. It wasn't loping or clumsy, it was a purposeful, heavy stride, and then it noticed me. It stopped dead. Its whole body went still. It had been moving along the tree line, and it just froze mid-step, and then it turned its head. I couldn't see its face clearly from that distance, maybe 150 yards, but I felt its attention lock onto me. It was a physical sensation, like a sudden drop in temperature. The air went out of me, my hands clenched on the handlebars, the rubber grips squeaking under my sweaty palms. We just stared at each other for what was probably only 3 or 4 seconds, but it felt like an hour. My bike was still rolling forward, carrying me closer. I was a sitting duck on this stupid, silent, gliding bike. Then it turned sharply, its whole body pivoting toward the woods. That's when I panicked. I squeezed the handbrakes hard. The back tire skidded a little in the dirt, and I came to a stop, straddling the bike. My heart was hammering against my ribs so hard I could feel it in my throat. I was just frozen there, one foot on the ground, the other still on a pedal, watching this thing. Now that it was facing away, I could see its outline clearly against the bright green of the alfalfa. Broad, rounded shoulders that seemed to have no neck, a forward lean to its whole posture. The hair on its back was matted and dark. It was just standing there at the edge of the woods, as if it was deciding what to do. I don't know why I did it. It was the dumbest thing I could have possibly done. A sound just came out of me. It wasn't a word. It was just a sharp, involuntary gasp of air, a little huh sound, like when you get surprised. It wasn't loud, but in that dead quiet afternoon, it might as well have been a gunshot. The thing swung back toward me. It moved so fast. Its arm came up, not in a wave, not in a threat, really. It was just a swift, sharp movement, bringing its forearm across its body. The arm was long, really long and thick, and then it bolted. It didn't run like a man. It didn't run like an animal I'd ever seen. It was this powerful, lunging sprint downhill toward a denser part of the forest. It was unbelievably fast for something so huge. Its legs ate up the ground, and then, halfway down the slope, it happened. Its foot must have caught on a root or a dip in the ground because it stumbled. It wasn't a full fall, but it pitched forward, off balance, and it caught itself with one hand. It slammed its palm down on the earth, and its whole body kept moving, so it was almost in a sprinter's starting stance for a split second. One hand on the ground, its powerful legs driving, and as it did that, it let out a sound. That sound, I will hear it until the day I die. It was a deep, guttural, powerful grunt, not a roar, not a scream. A grunt, the kind of sound a huge weightlifter makes when he's pushing a massive barbell. But this was layered with something else, frustration maybe, or surprise. It was a sound that came from the very core of it, and it wasn't just loud, it was dense. It felt like it hit me in the chest. It echoed across the field. I felt the vibration of it in my feet. For a second, the whole world was just that sound. Then it was gone. It pushed off from the ground, and in 2 more bounds, it vanished into the thick shadows of the trees. Just like that. The alfalfa field was empty again. The woods were just woods. The only sound was the wind, which had started up again, and the frantic metallic buzzing of cicadas in the trees. I didn't move. I couldn't. My body was locked up. The fear was a cold, heavy liquid pouring into my veins, freezing me in place. My brain was screaming at me to go, to move, but my limbs wouldn't listen. I just stared at the spot where it had disappeared, waiting for it to come back out. My eyes scanned the tree line, every shadow now a potential threat. Was that a shape? Was it moving? My breath was coming in short, ragged little pants. I felt like I was going to throw up. Then the spell broke. A jolt went through me, and I scrambled onto the bike seat, my legs feeling like wet noodles. I started pedaling, not like a kid riding a bike, but like a machine, like my life depended on every rotation. And I believed it did. I pedaled back up the hill I'd just coasted down, and it felt like a mountain. My lungs were burning, my thighs were on fire. I didn't look back. I couldn't bear to. I just focused on the gravel lane ahead, on the roof of the big barn in the distance. I've never pedaled so hard in my life. The wind wasn't a fun rush anymore. It was a cold slap in the face. Every bump in the path jolted me, and I expected at any second to feel a huge, hairy hand grab me from behind and pull me off the bike. I could still feel its eyes on my back. I pedaled past the barn, swerved onto the main driveway, and skidded to a halt in a cloud of dust right outside the farmhouse kitchen door. I didn't even kick the stand down. I just let the bike clatter onto the gravel and ran inside, the screen door slamming shut behind me with a crack that made my grandma jump. I was gasping, covered in sweat and dust, my heart trying to beat its way out of my chest. My grandma was at the sink, her hands covered in flour or something. "What in the world is the matter with you?" she asked, her voice sharp with surprise. I started talking, the words tumbling out in a messy, hysterical jumble. "There's something in the field down by the alfalfa. It was huge. It was walking. It made a sound." My grandpa came in from the back porch then, wiping his hands on a rag. He'd heard the commotion. "Slow down, boy. What's all this?" I tried to explain again, more slowly, but my voice was shaking. I told them about the shape, the size, the way it walked, the grunt. I was pointing back toward the field, my hand trembling. They exchanged a look, the kind of look adults share when a kid is being silly. Probably just one of the cows got through the fence again, my grandpa said, his voice calm and steady. Old Bessie's a wanderer, looks funny from a distance in the heat haze. It wasn't a cow, I insisted, my voice cracking. It was standing up. It ran on 2 legs. Shadow from the clouds, then, my grandma said, turning back to her bowl. Your eyes play tricks on you in this heat. You probably just saw a shadow and got yourself all worked up. I stood there, my whole body trembling with the leftover adrenaline and now a new crushing feeling of frustration. They didn't believe me. They were dismissing it. To them, it was a simple, explainable thing. A cow, a shadow, but I knew. I had seen it. I had felt its stare. I had heard that grunt echo in my bones. I didn't say anything else. I just went up to my room and sat on the edge of the bed, staring out the window at the alfalfa field in the distance. It looked so peaceful, so normal. But it wasn't. I knew something was out there, something that didn't fit, something that shouldn't exist. The memory of its powerful, agile escape was burned into my mind. The way it moved, so fast and so heavy at the same time, the sheer, raw physicality of it. I didn't go back down to that field for the rest of my stay. I stayed close to the house. I watched the tree line constantly. I started noticing sounds at night that I'd never paid attention to before. The rustling in the woods, the snap of a twig. Were they always there, or was it something else? That was more than 20 years ago. I've been back to the farm since. My grandparents are gone now, and the place belongs to a cousin. The alfalfa field is still there. The hill is still there. Sometimes when I visit, I stand at the top of that hill and look down. Nothing has ever happened again. I've never seen anything, but I know what I saw that day. It wasn't a cow. It wasn't a shadow. It was something real, something alive, something that looked at me and then ran, stumbling and grunting back into the secrets of the woods. And every single time I think about it, even now, as a grown man, it sends a cold, hard shiver straight down my spine. I can still feel the handlebars in my hands. I can still hear the wind, and I can still hear that grunt, a sound that came from a place I don't understand, a sound that proved the world is a lot bigger and a lot stranger than I ever thought it was. And I just don't know what it was. I never will. Story 15. We were all out on the lake around 11:30 at night. The sky was clear, and you could see a bunch of stars because there's no city lights out there. It was peaceful, just the water lapping against the boats and the occasional crackle from the dying campfire on shore. I was in a canoe with my husband, and one of our friends was in a kayak a little ways off. We were all just floating, talking in low voices about nothing important, maybe reminiscing about earlier when we'd set off some fireworks. Everything felt normal, like any other summer night. Then, out of nowhere, our friend in the kayak says, "Whoa, do you guys smell that?" And yeah, I caught it too, this strong, musky smell, like a skunk but way heavier, almost rotten. It came from the west, drifting across the water. At first I thought it was just some animal passing through, maybe a skunk or something, but it was so potent it made my eyes water. We all kind of paused, and that's when we heard it. Crashing sounds from the east side, near where the power lines run through the woods. It wasn't like a branch falling. It was this heavy, deliberate snapping, like something big was moving through the trees. My husband grabbed his flashlight and shone it toward the noise, but we couldn't see anything at first. The beam just cut through the darkness, hitting leaves and shadows. Then, from the same direction, this huge rock, I'm not exaggerating, it was the size of a German shepherd, flew out of nowhere and landed in the lake with a massive splash. It hit the water about 20 yards from the kayak, and the sound was like a cannon going off. Water sprayed everywhere, and the kayak rocked violently. My heart just dropped into my stomach. I remember gripping the side of the canoe so hard, my knuckles turned white. What the hell could throw a rock that big? Our friend in the kayak, He's a bit of a hothead, started pounding his paddle on the water and yelling, "Hey, you big ape!" I think he was trying to scare whatever it was off, but it felt like the dumbest thing to do. I wanted to scream at him to shut up, but my throat was too tight. And then, almost like a response, another rock came flying. This one was even bigger, and it landed within 10 yards of the kayak. The splash was closer, and I felt the water shake our canoe. That's when the fear really set in. This wasn't some random accident. We were being targeted. My husband fumbled for the bottle rockets we had left from earlier. He lit one and sent it shooting into the sky, hoping the noise and light would scare whatever it was away. At the same time, he grabbed his 12-gauge shotgun from the bottom of the canoe and started loading it. His hands were shaking, and I could hear the shells rattling. I've never seen him look so scared, and he's usually the calm one. I was just frozen, staring toward the trees where the rocks came from. That's when I saw it. In the beam of my husband's flashlight, for just a second, there was this thing peeking out from behind a tree. It was about 4.5 to 5 feet tall, with no neck. Its head seemed to sit right on its shoulders. It had a thick chest and broad shoulders, covered in light medium brown fur that blended perfectly with the tree bark. But the eyes... God, the eyes were what got me. They were dark yellow, almost glowing, and they fixed right on us. It felt like they were looking into me, like it knew exactly where we were. I couldn't breathe. It was like all the air had been sucked out of my lungs. The creature didn't move much, just stayed there, half hidden. And then it ducked back behind the tree, but the feeling of being watched didn't go away. It was like the woods themselves were alive and hostile. From the south, we started hearing these whooping sounds, deep, guttural calls that didn't sound like any animal I've ever heard. It was rhythmic, almost like communication, and it sent chills down my spine. That's when it hit me. There might be more than one of them. My husband fired the shotgun into the air, the blast echoing across the lake. It was deafening, and for a second everything went quiet. But then the whooping started again, closer this time. The friend in the kayak was paddling frantically toward us, his face pale in the moonlight. We all huddled together, our boats bumping into each other, and just listened. The musk smell was still strong, mixing with the scent of gunpowder and wet wood. We decided to get back to shore as fast as we could. Paddling felt like moving through molasses. Every splash made me jump. Once we hit the beach, we dragged the boats up and ran to the campsite. We didn't even bother with the tents. We just sat in the open near the fire pit with the shotgun ready. My husband kept the flashlight sweeping the tree line, but we didn't see the creature again. Not directly anyway. But the sounds... That's what kept us up until daylight. It started with what sounded like a baby crying, high-pitched and desperate, coming from the woods. It was so realistic that for a second, I thought a child was out there lost. Then came these woman screams, not like someone yelling, but these awful blood-curdling shrieks that made my skin crawl. They'd start and stop abruptly, like someone was toying with us. Underneath it all, there was this heavy breathing, like something big was just standing there, watching us from the darkness. It was so close. I could almost feel its breath on my neck. We didn't sleep at all. We just sat there, backs to each other, listening and waiting. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig made my heart race. I kept thinking about the power lines, how they cut through the forest, and how the sounds seemed to move along them. It was like whatever was out there was using them as trails, moving back and forth, surrounding us. My mind kept going to stories I'd heard about grassmen or Bigfoot, but I never believed any of it until that night. Now, I can't shake the image of those glowing eyes or the feeling that we were just prey. When the sun finally came up, the sounds faded away and the musk smell dissipated. We packed up our stuff in a hurry and left without even having breakfast. None of us talked much on the drive home. We were all too shaken. Since then, I haven't been able to go into the woods without feeling this deep, primal fear. It's like that encounter opened a door in my mind, and now I know there are things out there that we can't explain. I keep asking myself what it was, why it targeted us, and if it's still out there. But I don't have any answers. All I have is the memory of that night and the certainty that we were never alone out there. Story 16. My wife, Sarah, and I had spent the afternoon with her uncle. He was a good man, proud as a peacock over his new truck. It was a big, heavy thing, a Ford, I think, dark blue, and smelling powerfully of new vinyl and cigarette smoke. He'd bought it just a few weeks prior and wanted to take us for a drive out toward Blue Creek, way out in Lenore, in Caldwell County. It was beautiful country, the kind of deep rolling hills and thick woods that make you feel small in a good way, a God's creation kind of way. The visit was normal. We had supper, talked about church, about family. As it got dark, her uncle said, "Well, let's take this new rig for a proper spin." Sarah sat in the middle. I was on the passenger side, and he drove. The headlights cut a bright path through the deepening dark, and the trees on either side of the road were just solid black walls. We drove for maybe an hour, just talking, listening to the hum of the tires on the pavement. It was comfortable. It was familiar. On the way back, her uncle offered me the wheel. "You drive her back, preacher," he'd said with a smile. "Get a feel for her." I was happy to. I liked driving, the focus of it. I slid behind the wheel, adjusted the seat. The dashboard lights glowed a soft green. Sarah stayed in the middle, buckling herself in, and her uncle moved over to the passenger window. The road back was winding, a two-lane blacktop that snaked through the woods. There were no streetlights out there. It was just your headlights in the dark, and every so often you'd see the reflective eyes of a possum or a raccoon caught in the beams before they scurried off. I was concentrating, my hands at 10 and 2, leaning forward a little, my eyes tracing the edge of the road where the asphalt met the dirt shoulder. The radio was off. The only sounds were the engine, the tires, and the quiet murmur of Sarah and her uncle talking low about some cousin or another. We were coming up on a curve I remembered from the drive out. It was a sharp one, the kind where you have to slow down a little, where the trees leaned in close on both sides, their branches making a sort of tunnel. I took my foot off the gas, let the truck coast into the turn. My high beams were on, punching a hole through the darkness, lighting up the road ahead as it curved to the left. That's when Sarah screamed. It wasn't a yell or a gasp. It was a full-throated, raw scream of pure terror, the kind that doesn't even sound human. It was so sudden and so sharp it felt like a physical blow. My whole body jerked, my head snapped to the right, to where she was staring, and my eyes followed hers out through the windshield, and I saw it. Standing right in the middle of our lane, not 30 feet in front of the truck, was a figure, a massive, massive figure. My brain scrambled to make sense of what I was seeing. For a split second, I thought it was a bear standing on its hind legs. But that thought evaporated instantly. This was no bear. It was covered in hair, a dark, shaggy brown that looked almost black in the headlights. It was tall, so tall I remember my mind just repeating, 9 feet, it has to be 9 feet tall. Its legs were thick, like tree trunks, and its arms were long, hanging down past its knees. But it was the face that burned itself into me. The face was grey, a sickly, hairless grey like old clay, and in the center of that grey face were 2 eyes. They weren't animal eyes, they weren't reflective, they were a deep, glowing red, like 2 burning coals, and it was staring right into the cab of the truck. Right at us. Time didn't just slow down, it stopped, it froze solid. My foot was still hovering over the brake pedal, but I couldn't move it. I couldn't do anything. I could feel the blood drain from my face, a cold wash that started at my scalp and went all the way down to my toes. My hands were locked on the steering wheel, my knuckles white. I could feel the fine-grained texture of the plastic wheel cover under my fingertips, every little ridge. Next to me, Sarah's scream had cut off into a choked, gurgling sound. Her left hand shot out and clamped onto my right arm, just above the elbow. Her grip was incredibly strong, her fingers digging into my muscle so hard it felt like she was trying to reach the bone. I could feel her whole body trembling, a violent, uncontrollable shaking that transmitted through her hand into my arm. From the passenger seat, her uncle let out a low, strangled noise. "Lord God Almighty," he whispered, the words barely audible. I could see him in my peripheral vision, leaning forward, his body rigid, his face pressed almost against the windshield. His mouth was hanging open. We just sat there, the three of us, trapped in that stopped moment. The truck's engine was still rumbling, the headlights still blazing, illuminating this thing. It didn't move, it just stood there, planted in the road, its red eyes fixed on us. That gaze, it wasn't a blank animal stare. It was aware. It was intelligent. It was looking at us, studying us. And there was a weight to that look, a malevolence that I can't even begin to describe. It felt like it was seeing right through the glass and the metal, right into the three terrified souls inside. My faith, my solid foundation, didn't have a box to put this thing in. This was outside of everything. The silence in the cab was absolute, a thick, suffocating blanket. I could hear my own heart hammering in my ears, a frantic, panicked drumbeat. I could hear Sarah's ragged, hitched breathing. I could smell the new vinyl of the seats and the faint, stale scent of her uncle's cigarettes. This couldn't last. We were coasting, still moving forward, slowly, inevitably. We were going to hit it. That thought, the sheer physical impossibility of hitting something that massive, finally broke the spell in my head. My right foot, as if it had a mind of its own, stomped down, not on the brake, on the horn. The sound was obscenely loud in the quiet night, a long, blaring hoong that shattered the stillness. The creature didn't even flinch. It didn't startle like a deer would have. Its head didn't move. Those red eyes didn't waver. It just kept staring, as if the horn was nothing, an insignificant noise. Then it moved. It didn't run. It didn't step. It leapt. In one single, fluid, impossible motion, it went from standing stock still in the center of the road to being off on the right-hand shoulder. There was no build-up, no crouch. It was just here, then there. The power in that movement was terrifying. It was like watching a spring uncoil, but a spring that weighed 400 pounds. And as it landed, on 2 feet, its body twisted at the waist, its head swiveled, and those red eyes locked onto us again. It had moved sideways maybe 15 feet, but it was still facing the truck. The sheer unnaturalness of that twist, the way its upper body turned while its legs were planted, sent a physical chill down my spine. It was a cold that started in the pit of my stomach and radiated outwards, a deep, primal cold that had nothing to do with the October air. My brain was screaming one word over and over: wrong! This is wrong! My hand, still gripping the wheel, slammed down on the horn again. I held it this time, a continuous, desperate blare that was a substitute for the scream caught in my own throat. That did it. The creature turned its head, looking away from us toward the dark wall of the woods, and then it started to walk. It didn't run. It walked. It took long, deliberate strides, its legs covering an incredible amount of ground with each step. Its arms swung heavily at its sides, not like a man's arms, but with a powerful pendulum-like motion. The sheer mass of it was evident in every movement. I could almost feel the thud of its steps through the truck's frame. It walked with a purpose, a calm, unhurried gait that was more frightening than if it had charged us. It reached the tree line, and without breaking stride, stepped between 2 large pines and was swallowed by the darkness. 1 second it was there, a massive dark shape at the edge of the headlight's reach, and the next it was just gone. The woods just absorbed it. The horn was still blaring. I became aware of the sound again, a harsh, bleating noise that was now just filling an empty space. I lifted my hand off the wheel. The silence that rushed back in was almost as loud as the horn had been. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. Sarah's hand was still vice-gripped on my arm, her fingernails leaving half-moon impressions in my skin that I would find later. Her uncle was still frozen, leaning forward. I was still clutching the steering wheel, my body rigid. My foot finally found the brake pedal, and I pressed down, bringing the truck to a complete stop, right in the middle of the road, exactly where the thing had been standing. The engine idled roughly. I just stared at the empty spot on the shoulder where it had landed, then at the gap in the trees where it had disappeared. My mind was a blank, white static. There was no thought, only a residual, all-consuming terror that had soaked into my bones. After what felt like an hour, but was probably only 10 or 15 seconds, her uncle finally spoke. His voice was hoarse, cracked. "Drive," he said. "Just drive now." The command broke my paralysis. I nodded, a stiff, jerky motion. I put my foot on the gas. The truck lurched forward. I was driving too fast for the winding road, my eyes glued to the rearview mirror, expecting to see those red eyes emerging from the woods behind us, chasing us. I saw nothing but darkness. The rest of the drive home was a blur. Nobody said a word. Sarah finally let go of my arm and just sat there, hugging herself, rocking back and forth slightly. Her uncle stared out his window into the blackness, his face pale and drawn. I drove, my hands shaking so badly I had to grip the wheel with all my strength to keep us on the road. Every shadow at the side of the road looked like a hulking form. Every tree stump was a crouching figure. My heart didn't stop its frantic pounding until we finally saw the lights of the first houses on the outskirts of Hickory. We pulled into her uncle's driveway and just sat there for a minute with the engine off. The normalcy of the neighborhood, the streetlights, the trimmed lawns, the sound of a TV from a nearby house, felt alien and fragile, like a thin veneer over a world that was much darker and stranger than I had ever believed. We went inside. Her uncle poured 3 glasses of whiskey with hands that trembled almost as badly as mine. We drank them in silence. There was nothing to say. What could we say? We hadn't seen a ghost or a spaceship. We had seen something physical, something real, something that stood in the road and looked at us with an intelligence that was utterly alien and deeply menacing. We never reported it. Who would we tell? The police? They'd think we were drunk or crazy. The newspaper? We'd be a laughingstock. We just carried it with us. This secret, this thing that had broken our understanding of the world. I'm an old man now. I've been a preacher for most of my life. I've counseled people through every kind of fear and tragedy you can imagine. But I've never found a box to put that night in. It wasn't a demon. It wasn't an angel. It was just a thing. A real, living, breathing thing that exists in the deep woods of this country. And it looked at us, and it knew we were there. My faith is still strong, but it's a different faith now. It has to make room for the fact that there are things in the shadows that we don't understand, things that don't fit in the pages of any book. I never went back to that stretch of road near Blue Creek. Not ever. And sometimes on a quiet, dark night, when the wind is just right, I can still feel the ghost of Sarah's grip on my arm. And I can see, as clear as if it were yesterday, those 2 red coals in a grey face staring right through me. It saw us, and I have no idea what it was. Story 17. Okay, so I've been sitting on this for a while now, and I guess I need to get it out there. I've never really talked about it in detail because, honestly, it still messes with my head when I think about it too much. But here goes nothing. It was one of those crisp, early fall mornings in the Green Lake area. You know, when the air has that bite to it, but the sun's just starting to warm things up. My son-in-law and I had been planning this hunting trip for weeks. We're both pretty experienced hunters, and we've got these hounds we've trained since they were pups. They're like family to us, so when we head out, it's not just about the game, it's about the whole experience. That day, we were after deer, something to stock the freezer for the winter. We'd packed light, just our rifles, some water, and the dogs on leashes until we hit the deeper woods. We started out around sunrise, the sky all pink and orange, and the ground was still damp from dew. The hounds were excited, pulling at their leads, their breath making little clouds in the cold air. My son-in-law was in a good mood, cracking jokes about how one of the dogs, Buck, always manages to find the muddiest spots. I was just enjoying the quiet, the way the forest smells after a cool night. Pine and wet earth, that kind of thing. We've hunted this area before, but never too deep into the marshlands because it gets tricky with the terrain. But that day, the dogs picked up a scent early on, and we decided to follow it. We'd been walking for maybe an hour or two when the hounds started getting really worked up. Their barks changed from that excited yipping to something deeper, more urgent. They'd treed something, and it wasn't like when they corner a raccoon or a squirrel. This was different. The sound was sharper, almost frantic. We let them off the leads and they bolted ahead, disappearing into the thick spruce and tamarack that lined the marsh. My son-in-law stayed back to keep an eye on our gear, and I followed the dogs because I wanted to see what had them so riled up. The ground here is uneven, lots of little hills and dips, with water seeping up in places. I had to watch my step, my boots sinking into the soft ground. The trees were dense, and the light was fading a bit under the canopy, making everything feel closed in. I could hear the dogs barking up ahead, but it was echoey, hard to pinpoint. So I decided to climb up this little rise. It was more of a hummock, really, covered in moss and fallen branches, to get a better vantage point. From up there I could see farther into the marsh, and the dogs' barks were clearer, coming from a cluster of spruce trees about 50 yards away. That's when I first noticed the smell. It hit me like a physical thing, this awful rotten stench that made my stomach turn. I've been around dead animals before, and this wasn't that. It was heavier, more like spoiled meat mixed with something earthy, almost like a bog, but with a sickly sweetness to it. I figured it was just something decomposing in the marsh, maybe a carcass the dogs had found, so I tried to ignore it. I swung my radio tracker around, trying to get a better signal from the dogs' collars, and that's when I saw the eyes. They were low to the ground, nestled among the spruce trees, and they weren't moving. At first I thought it was a deer or maybe a bear. We get black bears around here sometimes, but these eyes were different. They were set deep, almost shadowed, and they had this intensity to them that made the hair on my arms stand up. I froze for a second, just staring, and then I realized they were staring right back at me. My heart started pounding, and I felt this cold sweat break out on my back. I kept telling myself it was nothing, just an animal, but my gut was screaming that something was wrong. I took a step closer, still on the high spot, and that's when it stood up. It happened so fast, but it felt like slow motion. One moment, there were just those eyes, and the next, this thing rose from behind a fallen log on a deer trail about 20 feet away. I swear, my breath caught in my throat. It was huge, maybe 8 feet tall, with these long, muscular arms that hung down past its knees. Its chest was barrel-shaped, and it had a pot belly that made it look solid, not fat. The hair was thick and matted, black and brown in patches, and its face was less hairy, with a flat nose and a mouth that hung open slightly. I could see distinct fingers on its hands, not like paws, more like human fingers, but thicker and covered in coarse hair. Its ears were small, almost tucked into the sides of its head, and those eyes, they were deep-set and dark, fixed on me with this unnerving focus. For what felt like forever, we just stared at each other. I couldn't move. My legs felt like they were rooted to the ground, and my rifle was slung over my shoulder, but I didn't even think to reach for it. All I could do was watch as it slowly wrapped one of its hands around the trunk of a large spruce tree next to it. The tree was thick, probably a foot in diameter, and its fingers curled around it like it was nothing. The bark cracked a little under the pressure, and I heard this low, grinding sound. That's when the terror really set in. It wasn't just fear, it was this primal, gut-wrenching dread that made my skin crawl. I felt like I was looking at something that wasn't supposed to exist, something that defied everything I knew about the woods. I don't know how long we stood there, maybe a few seconds, maybe a minute, but then somehow it was gone. I can't recall it moving or walking away. One moment it was there, and the next, the space was empty. The smell, though, that foul odor, lingered thick in the air, so strong I could taste it in the back of my throat. It was like it had seeped into my clothes, my skin. I stumbled back, my legs shaky, and nearly fell off the hummock. The dogs were still barking in the distance, but their sounds felt distant, like they were coming from another world. I hurried back to where my son-in-law was waiting, my heart hammering in my chest. I must have looked pale or something because he asked if I was okay. I just mumbled something about the dogs treeing a big animal and that we should head back. He laughed it off, saying I must have seen a bear and gotten spooked. But when we got closer to the truck, he wrinkled his nose and joked, "Man, what did you step in? Smells like something died out here." I didn't say anything. I just got in the truck, my hands trembling on the steering wheel. The whole drive back I was disoriented. The world outside the window seemed blurry, like I was looking through a fog. I kept replaying that moment in my head. The eyes, the way it stood, the hand on the tree. It felt so real, but part of me wanted to believe it was a hallucination, maybe from exhaustion or something. But that smell, it clung to me for hours, even after I showered. I could still catch whiffs of it in the truck days later. We left the hounds out there because I was too shaken to go back right away. I called a buddy the next day, and he helped me retrieve them. They were fine, just tired and muddy, but I never went back to that part of the marsh. Not ever. Every time I think about it, I get this chill down my spine. I've spent my whole life in these woods, and I've never seen anything like that before or since. It's like that thing was just there for a moment, to show itself, and then it vanished, leaving me with this gap in my memory and a fear that never really goes away. I still don't know what it was, and I doubt I ever will. Story 18. I was maybe a third of the way around the pond when I first heard it. It wasn't the normal night sounds. It was a footstep, not a clear one, not like a person walking on pavement, but a soft, scattered crunch, like something heavy was carefully placing its foot down in the pine needles and dirt just off the path to my left. I stopped walking, my ears straining. The second I stopped, the sound stopped. The frogs kept going, the insects kept buzzing, but that one particular sound, the one that didn't belong, just cut off. I stood there for a full minute listening. Nothing. My heart was beating a little faster, but I told myself it was a deer. We had plenty of them. They're skittish. They freeze when they hear you, so I started walking again. And the second my foot crunched on the gravel, the sound in the woods started up again, a single heavy footfall matching my pace. Then another. This time it was closer. It wasn't parallel to me anymore. It was angling in, cutting across the space between us. My skin prickled, the hair on my arm standing up. This wasn't a deer. A deer would have bolted. A deer doesn't stop when you stop and start when you start. A deer doesn't deliberately close the distance. I stopped dead again, my whole body tense. Silence from the woods, just the hum of the swamp. I held my breath. I could feel my pulse in my throat. I remember thinking, just be a person, please. Just be another researcher out for a walk. But no one else was out this late, and no person walks like that, with such heavy, deliberate steps in the thick undergrowth. I took a hesitant step forward. Crunch, a step from the woods, maybe 15 feet away now. I took another. Crunch. It was right there, just beyond the first line of cypress trees, a wall of darkness I couldn't see into. I could hear its breathing now. It was a low, rhythmic sound, a deep inhalation and exhalation that was too loud, too powerful to be anything I knew. It wasn't panting like a dog, it was more controlled, like the idle of a big engine. That's when the fear really locked in. It wasn't just unease anymore. It was a cold, sharp terror that started in my gut and radiated out to my fingers and toes, making them feel numb. I was being stalked. The thought was so primitive, so alien to my modern life, that it almost didn't compute. But my body knew. Every instinct was screaming at me to run. I couldn't just stand there. I had to do something. So I spun around to face the woods, my back to the pond, and I yelled. It wasn't a word, just a loud, guttural "Hey!" that tore out of my throat. It was meant to scare it, to assert myself, to break whatever this was. The effect was instantaneous and horrifying. The footsteps didn't stop or retreat. They sped up. They went from a deliberate stalking walk to a fast, heavy pounding through the undergrowth, coming straight for me. The breathing turned into a harsh, wet-sounding pant, right on top of me. I didn't see it. I didn't need to. My brain short-circuited. There was no more thought, only pure animal panic. I turned and I ran. I have never run like that in my life. It was a blind, desperate sprint. The 300 feet to the clearing near the director's trailer felt like 3 miles. The gravel path was slippery, and I almost fell twice, my arms windmilling to keep my balance. I could hear it behind me, the crashing of branches and the thunderous footfalls. So loud it was like a truck plowing through the woods. And the breathing, that was the worst part. It was right there, above my head. I'm not a tall person, 5'6", and this thing, whatever it was big. Its breathing was so loud and so close, it felt like it was right on my neck. I could feel the heat of its breath on the back of my scalp. I remember a hot, foul smell, like rotting meat and damp earth, washing over me. I was sobbing and running, my lungs burning, convinced with every step that I was about to be grabbed, pulled down, and that would be it. I didn't dare look back. Looking back would have slowed me down, and slowing down meant death. I just focused on the distant, blessed square of yellow light from the director's trailer window. It was my finish line. The crashing behind me was immense, like small trees were being shoved aside. It wasn't trying to be quiet anymore. It was in a full-on charge. I burst out of the tree line into the small, grassy clearing. I stumbled, my legs giving way, and I fell onto my hands and knees in the damp grass, gasping for air. I was crying, my whole body shaking uncontrollably, and as I hit the ground, the thing behind me hit the edge of the woods. There was a tremendous crack, like a thick branch being snapped in two, and then the sound of it crashing away back into the deep darkness. It was gone. The sudden silence was almost as loud as the noise had been. I lay there for I don't know how long, maybe a minute, just trying to breathe, to convince my body that the immediate danger was over. My heart was hammering against my ribs so hard I thought it would break them. I pushed myself up onto my knees and looked back at the woods. It was just a black wall again, silent, but I could feel it. I knew it was still in there, watching. I scrambled to my feet and ran the last 50 feet to the director's trailer, pounding on his door like a madman. He opened it, looking annoyed and sleepy, holding a mug of coffee. I must have been a sight, covered in grass stains, face streaked with tears and dirt, hyperventilating. I tried to explain, the words tumbling out in a jumbled mess. Something in the woods chased me, big, breathing. He listened for a minute, then sighed, went back inside and came out with a rifle. He walked to the edge of the clearing, raised the gun and fired 2 shots into the air. The bang was deafening in the quiet night. "Probably just a cougar," he said, his voice flat and dismissive. "They get curious sometimes, scared it off. You're fine." I just stared at him. A cougar? No. No way. I've heard cougars. They're quiet. They scream. They don't make heavy footfalls like a biped. They don't stalk you, mimicking your steps. They don't have breath you can feel on the back of your head. He hadn't heard what I heard. He hadn't smelled that smell. He hadn't felt that primal, gut-wrenching terror of being prey. He just saw a spooked kid and applied the easiest, most logical explanation. I went back to my cabin. I didn't sleep. I locked the door, pushed a chair under the knob, and sat on my bed with my back to the wall, staring at the window. Every tiny noise from outside, the settling of the building, a raccoon on the roof, made me jump. But it was the feeling of being watched that was the most unbearable. It was a physical pressure, a weight on my skin. I felt like something was standing just outside, in the dark, its eyes on me. I felt that way for hours, long after the sun came up. The terror of that night wasn't just the running, or the sound, or even the closeness of it. It was the realization that happened in the middle of it all. In that split second between my yell and its charge, I wasn't just being followed by a random animal. I was being hunted. It was playing with me. It was herding me. It knew what it was doing. It was intelligent. It knew that my stopping meant I was listening, and its stopping meant it was listening back. It knew that speeding up would trigger my flight response. It was a game, and I was the mouse. And the final chilling thought that has stayed with me, the one that keeps me up some nights even now, is that it let me go. It was right behind me. Its breath was on me. It could have taken me, but it didn't. It broke off at the edge of the light. It chose to stop. I didn't escape because I was fast. I escaped because it allowed me to. I have no idea why. I'll never know. But I know with a certainty that sits like a stone in my chest that it was no cougar. It was something else, something old and smart and terrible. And for a few minutes on a dark path in the Everglades, it decided I was its prey, and then it decided I wasn't. And I have to live with not knowing why.